Alexandria, a gateway to knowledge, stories, and imagination. A digital library without limits, always open, always growing. Subscribe, like, and be part of the journey of discovery.
Chapter 1: Athene's Plan. The famous city of Troy had fallen. After a siege that lasted 10 years, the united Greek forces sacked and burned it. The princes, having satisfied their thirst for revenge, longed for home. They set sail with their ships and companions. Some returned safely, while others were tossed about on stormy seas, wandering for years without ever reaching their homeland. Agamemnon, the bravest of the surviving heroes, met an even worse fate. Filled with joy, he gazed upon his ancestral home once more and thanked the gods for his safe return. He rushed eagerly to the arms of his beloved wife Clytemnestra, unaware that she had betrayed him and married another man in his absence. She welcomed him with feigned tenderness and offered him a refreshing drink. He undressed, drank deeply from the familiar goblet, and stretched out on the soft cushions. But as he slept, his wife's accomplice suddenly attacked him with a sword and killed him. The story of noble Penelope, the beautiful wife of Odysseus, was very different. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, an island off the western coast of Greece, had been drawn into the war against Troy. Since his departure, many young princes from Ithaca and the neighboring islands had pursued Penelope, hoping to marry her. She was young and beautiful, and possessed great wealth in sheep, cattle, goats, and swine. Whoever married her would not only gain her fortune, but also take Odysseus's place as ruler of the island. Eager to claim this power, the suitors tried to convince her to return to her father's house as a widow, so they could formally ask for her hand according to custom. They argued that Odysseus would never return. But the devoted wife could not let go of her beloved husband so easily. She believed he would come back. Though she wept day and night in fear and longing, hope gave her strength. Years passed, and the war dragged on. Finally, news arrived in Ithaca that Troy had fallen and the warriors were returning home. Penelope's heart filled with renewed hope. But as another year passed, and then another, no ship brought her husband back. Penelope questioned every stranger who came to Ithaca, asking for news of Odysseus. His companions had long since returned, Nestor to Pylos, Menelaus to Sparta, yet no one knew what had happened to Odysseus or whether he was still alive. For 9 more years, Penelope endured her grief. 19 years had passed since she last saw her husband. He had left her with an infant, now a handsome young man. Telemachus was her only comfort, but he was too young and powerless to stand against the arrogant suitors. Over time, the suitors became more aggressive and devised a cruel plan to force Penelope into marriage. They allied with over 100 neighboring princes and gathered every morning at Odysseus's palace. There, they feasted on his herds, drank his wine, and depleted his stores. Their plan was simple. If they consumed enough of Odysseus's wealth, Telemachus would be forced to cast his mother out, so she would have no choice but to marry. From then on, the great halls of Odysseus's palace were filled from morning till night with these uninvited guests. They ordered the king's servants to obey them, took whatever they pleased, and mocked the household with loud laughter. The herd shrank, the grain and wine ran low, and no one could stop them. Penelope sat in her upper chamber at her loom and wept. Whenever Telemachus appeared among the suitors, they ridiculed him. A god had brought this misery upon Odysseus's house. Poseidon, ruler of the sea, was furious with him and sought revenge. He drove Odysseus across the vast oceans from north, to south and east to west. He destroyed his ships, killed his companions, and forced him through treacherous whirlpools and foreign lands. Now, while his enemies devoured his wealth at home, Odysseus remained a prisoner on a distant island far from Ithaca. The island was ruled by Calypso, a daughter of the gods. She wished to make him her husband, but Odysseus only longed for his homeland, his wife, and his son. Each day he sat on the shore, watching the waves in sorrow. He wished for nothing more than to see the smoke rising from his own hearth before he died. The gods of high Olympus were moved, especially Athene, the loyal friend of Odysseus. One day, when they gathered in their vast halls and Poseidon was away among the Ethiopians, Athene took the chance to tell Father Jupiter about the suffering of Odysseus and Penelope. The king of the gods was filled with compassion and agreed to Athene's request. She would visit Telemachus in disguise to give him courage, while Hermes would go to the Isle of Ogygia to command Calypso to release her prisoner immediately. Athene quickly prepared for her journey. She fastened her golden sandals to her feet, took her powerful lance in hand, and descended like the wind to Ithaca. She appeared at Telemachus's grand gateway in the form of Mentor, the Taphian king. There she was amazed to see the unruly suitors feasting, drinking, gambling, and shouting. The servants of Telemachus tended to them, carving meat, washing tables, and mixing wine with water according to the old custom. Among them sat Telemachus, taking no part in the revelry, weighed down with sorrow. Rising decisively, he strode forward to welcome the stranger at the gate, firmly grasping his hand and taking charge of his lance. With practiced hospitality, he guided his distinguished guest into the house, deliberately choosing a spot away from the disruptive suitors to ensure a peaceful meal. The guest was seated on a dais with a footstool beneath his feet. Telemachus sat beside him, and at a signal a servant brought a golden ewer and a silver basin to wash their hands, then placed a polished table before them. The stewardess served bread and meat, while a strong servant poured wine. Only after the guest had eaten and drunk did Telemachus ask his name and the reason for his visit. Athene replied as Mentor,
I am Mentor, the son of Alcimus and ruler of the Taphians. I am on my way to Temesa, and my ship lies anchored in the bay. As Odysseus and I are old friends, I wish to visit you before continuing my journey.
Telemachus then shared his troubles with his guest. The goddess listened carefully, as if she did not already know the story. She advised him to show strength in public, to boldly order the suitors to leave, and most importantly, to travel to Sparta and Pylos. There, the great heroes Nestor and Menelaus, who had fought beside Odysseus at Troy, might have news of him. Mentor added,
A divine inspiration tells me that he is not dead. Though far away, shipwrecked and held captive, you shall see him again if you follow my advice.
Telemachus began to admire and trust his father's old friend. Following the ancient custom of hospitality, he offered him a parting gift. However, the guest declined, saying he was in haste, but promised to accept it on his return voyage. Then, suddenly, he vanished like a bird. For the first time, Telemachus suspected he had been visited by a divine being. He reflected on all that the stranger had said and resolved to follow the advice. At once, he spoke out against the suitors' behavior. They were shocked to see him so bold, having never witnessed such courage from him before. Yet Antinous and Eurymachus, the most arrogant among them, mocked him, and soon the others joined in their laughter. They spent the evening singing and dancing, then departed to their homes as night fell. Telemachus also went to his sleeping chamber, guided by his faithful old nurse, Euryclea, who carried a burning torch before him. He removed his soft robe and tossed it to her. She folded it carefully and hung it on the wooden peg beside his bed. Then he lay down and wrapped himself in woolen blankets. The old nurse left, securing the doors behind her. As soon as morning arrived, Telemachus sprang from his bed, dressed, laced his sandals, and fastened his sword. Thus prepared, the dignified young man stepped out. He sent heralds to summon the people, and when the crowd gathered, he walked among them, carrying his lance, and accompanied by 2 swift-footed dogs. To everyone's amazement, Telemachus stepped forward, signaled for the heralds to bring him the scepter as a sign that he wished to speak, and began,
"People of Ithaca, I speak to you because intruders have invaded my home. My father is missing, possibly dead. These men who pretend to seek my mother's hand are nothing but parasites. They eat our food, drink our wine, and waste our wealth. Soon they will leave me with nothing. I need someone with my father's strength to drive them out. I call on you to help stop this injustice. Think of your own honor, and remember the gods are watching. My father never wronged any of you. Haven't I lost enough already without losing everything else?"
At these words, tears overcame him, and he threw the scepter to the ground. The assembly was filled with pity and compassion. All remained silent except for the most arrogant of the suitors, Antinous, who answered insolently,
"You speak boldly, Telemachus, but do you think you can make us look guilty in the eyes of the people? Who is truly to blame for your troubles if not yourself? Why have you not sent your mother away? Why does she not go willingly? For more than 3 years, she has deceived us and kept us waiting with her tricks. Did she not say, 'Do not rush the wedding until I finish weaving the shroud for my old father-in-law, Laertes, so that the women will not blame me if the old man, who was once so wealthy, is carried out without proper burial clothes?' And what did the clever lady do? She wove during the day, but unraveled the threads at night so the work would never be finished. Eventually, one of her servants revealed the truth to us. We forced her to complete the shroud, and now we demand that she keep her word. You must order her to return to her father's house and marry whomever she chooses or whomever her father selects for her. If you do this, we will not trouble you any further. But until she makes her choice, we will not leave. She must pick a husband from among the Achaeans."
Telemachus rejected this demand with righteous anger. Once again, he begged the suitors to leave his house and warned them of the god's wrath. But they only laughed at him, mocking not only him but also those who defended him. Then he proposed a new course of action. He would have a ship prepared so he could sail to Pylos and Sparta in search of his father. If after 1 year he heard no news of him, he promised that his mother would marry whomever she wished. The suitors scorned this idea, and the assembly broke up. Feeling dejected, Telemachus wandered to the shore, washed his hands in the dark waters, and prayed to the goddess who had appeared to him the day before. As he stood there alone, he saw Mentor, his father's old friend, approaching. Mentor had been among the people and had listened in anger to the defiant words of the suitors. He had even tried to speak in Telemachus's defense, but their mocking shouts had drowned out his voice. Now he had returned, and Telemachus believed he had come to help him carry out his plan. However, it was not really Mentor, it was Athene in disguise. She encouraged him, urged him not to delay the journey, and even offered to provide a ship and crew. Telemachus immediately returned home, confided in his old nurse Euryclea, and instructed her to prepare wine in jars, meal in skins, and everything else needed for the voyage. The kind-hearted old woman wept bitterly when she saw the delicate young man preparing for such a long and dangerous journey. She begged him repeatedly to give up the idea and wait for his father's return. But Telemachus stood firm. In the end, the nurse had no choice but to promise to keep his departure a secret. Not even his mother would know until she realized he was gone. While disguised as Mentor, Athene secured a ship and crew by evening. After the suitors went to bed and the household slept, she led Telemachus away quietly. The crew loaded supplies onto the ship, set up the mast, and secured it with ropes. Once the rowers boarded, they pushed off from shore. Athene sat next to Telemachus as the oars cut through the water. Above them, stars dotted the dark night sky, casting faint light on the waves as the ship sailed forward.
Hello. If you enjoyed our audiobook, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I need your support to bring more audiobooks to you. Thank you in advance for your support.
Chapter 2, Telemachus's Journey. At sunrise, the travelers saw Pylos ahead of them, a small town on the western coast of Peloponnesus, known today as the Morea Peninsula. It was the home of the wise and elderly Nestor, who ruled over his people like a father among his children. He had many descendants, and the people respected his wisdom and loved him for his kindness. His stories of past adventures captivated the young men who eagerly listened to his words. On the morning that Telemachus and his companions approached Pylos, Nestor had gathered his people on the shore for a great sacrifice to Poseidon. Thousands of celebrants stood in 9 groups, each consisting of 500 men, creating a magnificent scene. Each group had contributed 9 bulls for the offering. The sacrifices were burning on the altars, while the people feasted on the remaining meat. Athene and young Telemachus disembarked, leaving the ship in the care of the rowers, and walked toward the gathering. The goddess, disguised as Mentor, encouraged the hesitant Telemachus to approach the old man with confidence and instructed him on how to speak and behave. As soon as the people of Pylos saw them, a group of young men hurried forward to welcome them, extending their hands in friendship as was the custom of hospitality in ancient times. Pisistratus, Nestor's youngest son, was the most eager to greet them. He took both strangers by the hand and led them to comfortable seats on sheepskins beside his father and his brother, Thrasymedes. He then brought them meat and wine to refresh them. Pisistratus filled a golden goblet, took a drink in Athene's honor, and said,
"Dear guest, I ask you to join us in our joyful sacrifice, which we offer to Poseidon, ruler of the sea. Pour out this wine as an offering to the mighty god, and pray for our well-being. No man can live without the favor of the gods. Once you have made your offering and taken a drink, pass the goblet to your companion, so he may also pray for us. Since you are older, I have offered the cup to you first."
Athene was pleased by these respectful and thoughtful words. She took the cup, poured a few drops onto the ground, and prayed,
Hear me, Poseidon. Bless every good endeavor we undertake. Grant Nestor and his sons honor and reward the people of Pylos for their sacred sacrifice to you today. And may you guide my friend and me to success in the journey that has brought us here.
As she prayed, she secretly ensured that her wishes would be fulfilled. Then Telemachus received the cup from her hand, drank from it, and also made a sacrifice and prayer for the people celebrating the feast. Only after the guests had eaten did the wise Nestor consider it proper to ask their names and the purpose of their visit. Telemachus explained their mission and pleaded with the old man to tell him everything he knew about his noble father. He urged him to withhold nothing, no matter how terrible, as he needed to know the truth about his father's fate. Nestor, with the talkativeness of old age, began telling stories of the heroes and his own return from Troy. But Telemachus found no comfort in these tales, as Nestor knew no more about Odysseus's fate than he did. The old man advised him to go to Menelaus in Sparta. Of all the returning warriors, Menelaus had been delayed the longest and had only recently arrived home. Surely he would have news of Odysseus. Mentor approved of this idea, and the journey to Sparta was decided. By this time, night was falling, and the goddess reminded Telemachus that it was time to leave. Nestor's sons filled the cups once more, and the customary offerings were made to Poseidon and the immortal gods. Then Mentor and Telemachus rose and prepared to return to their ship. Nestor said when he saw them preparing to leave,
"The gods forbid. Shall my guests spend the day with me and then go off to sleep in a musty ship, as if I were a poor man with no cloaks or warm blankets in my house? No, my friends, I have plenty of soft cushions and fine garments, and the son of my old friend Odysseus shall not leave in such a way while I am alive. And even when I am gone, my sons will always honor the strangers who enter my home."
Mentor answered,
Well said. Telemachus must accept your hospitality. Let him go with you to stay in your palace, but I must hurry to the shore to spend the night with the young sailors and ensure their well-being. Early in the morning, I must visit the brave Cauconians to settle an old debt. In the meantime, send Telemachus to Sparta with your sons and provide him with a chariot and swift horses for the journey.
With these words, Mentor turned and, transforming into an eagle, soared into the sky. All were astonished, but Nestor immediately recognized the goddess, for he knew how often she had aided Odysseus in the past. Nestor said,
"Take courage, for you see that the gods are with you. And you, divine Athene, have mercy upon us all and grant us honor and glory. Behold, I vow to offer you each year a bull, broad of forehead and without blemish, which has never been yoked."
The people then dispersed, and Nestor returned to his house with his sons and his guest. Upon their arrival, wine was again offered and drunk. Pisistratus then led Telemachus to a couch beside his own in the pillared hall. The other sons, being married, had their own quarters inside the house. At sunrise, Nestor and his sons rose and gathered on the stone seats before the doorway to discuss the planned journey. Nestor then sent some of his sons to prepare the offering he had promised Athene. One went to the ship to bring all of Telemachus's rowers except 2. Another was sent to summon a goldsmith to gild the horns of the sacrificial ox. A third was ordered to tell the shepherd to find and bring a suitable animal, and a fourth was sent to inform the maidens to prepare a banquet. Before long, the goldsmith arrived, followed by the rowers, and soon the shepherd led up the chosen ox. When the goldsmith had finished gilding the ox's horns, 2 of Nestor's sons led the animal into the sacred circle. Nestor sprinkled himself with water, cut a lock of hair from the ox, and cast it upon the burning altar, offering a prayer as he scattered consecrated barley upon the ground. Then the mighty Thrasymedes stepped forward and struck a heavy blow with a sharp axe, severing the tendons of the ox's neck. The beast fell to the ground, stunned. Perseus caught the gushing blood in a vessel, while Pisistratus completed the sacrifice. The others then gathered to carve the meat. They cut off the shanks, wrapped them in strips of fat, and placed them on the altar fire to send up fragrant smoke to the goddess. They sprinkled wine over the offering and roasted the remaining pieces, turning them on spits. Other young men carefully cut up the rest of the meat and roasted it for the feast. When everything was ready, Telemachus appeared among the company, as striking as a god. He had bathed, anointed himself with oil, and wrapped himself in a fine mantle. The guests sat in a circle to enjoy the splendid feast, and when they had eaten their fill, Nestor reminded his sons that it was time to depart. They quickly harnessed 2 horses to a chariot, while a servant packed bread, wine, and meat for the journey. Telemachus took his seat and Pisistratus sat beside him, holding the reins and whip. They traveled swiftly all day, and by evening reached Scheria, the home of the kind Diodes, who welcomed them warmly. On the second day, they arrived at the castle of Menelaus in Lacedaemon, recognizing his lands by the vast fields of wheat. Pisistratus halted the prancing horses at the castle gate, and the two travelers quickly dismounted. Inside, they heard the sounds of celebration. A singer's voice blended with the sweet notes of a stringed instrument, and through the open gateway, they saw a crowd of guests. In the center, two dancers moved in rhythm with the music. It was a special day in Menelaus's palace. He was celebrating the marriage of two of his children. The feast was so lively and loud that no one had noticed the sound of the chariot arriving. By chance, a servant saw the strangers at the gate.
Two young men of noble bearing are outside. Shall I unharness their horses, or should I tell them to seek shelter elsewhere?
Menelaus replied,
What? How can you ask such a foolish question? Have we not been received kindly in foreign lands and given many gifts? Go quickly, take care of their horses, and bring them inside to join the feast.
The servant obeyed, and Telemachus and Pisistratus were led into the hall. They were amazed at the palace's splendor, for Menelaus had returned from his journeys with great wealth. Maidservants escorted them to the bath, and once they had anointed themselves, they dressed in fine tunics and cloaks. They then took their seats on raised couches beside their host. At once, servants brought small tables and food. One poured water from a golden ewer into a silver basin for them to wash their hands, while another served wine, meat, and bread. Menelaus said,
Now eat and drink with us. Afterward you shall tell me who you are, for I see that you are not common men.
With these words, he placed a fine, rich portion of roast, his own special share, on their plates, and the young men found it to be a delicious meal. Menelaus watched them closely. He noticed how astonished they were by the magnificence of the hall and its treasures. He saw them glance at each other in silent wonder, pointing out new objects. This led him to speak of his travels, the dangers he had faced for 8 years after the Trojan War, and the people he had met who had given him the precious treasures surrounding them. As he spoke, he often recalled the hardships of the Trojan War. When he mentioned the disgraceful murder of his brother, Agamemnon, tears filled his eyes. Menelaus continued,
But I would endure all of this patiently if only I could have kept my dearest friend, the noble Odysseus, with me. He was dearer to me than all others. We shared both joy and sorrow. If only I knew he was safe and could have him near me, I would grant him a city so that we could live side by side and speak to each other every day until death separated us. But only the gods know whether he is alive or dead. Perhaps even now his aged father, his faithful wife, and his son Telemachus are mourning him as if he were lost forever.
Telemachus hid his tears behind his cloak. Menelaus noticed this and hesitated, unsure whether to question him or allow him to grieve in silence. Just then, his wife, the once beautiful Helen, entered the hall, accompanied by her maidens. One carried a chair for her, another brought a soft woolen carpet for her feet, and a third carried her silver work basket. She seated herself near the guests, observed them closely, and then said to her husband,
Have you asked our guests their names? I have never seen two people resemble each other more than this young man and the noble Odysseus.
It is true, he has the same hands, feet, eyes, and hair as Odysseus. And just now, while I was speaking of our old friend, tears welled up in his eyes, and he hid his face in his purple cloak.
Pisistratus interrupted.
You are right, Menelaus, godlike ruler. This is indeed the son of Odysseus, but he is modest and did not wish to reveal himself immediately with boastful words. My father, Nestor, has sent me with him so that you might give him news of his noble father and offer him advice, for he is in great distress at home, and there is no one to stand up and protect him.
Menelaus would have rejoiced to meet the young man, but the painful memories of his lost friend overwhelmed him. He wept, as did Helen, and Telemachus continued to sob, while even Pisistratus was deeply moved. For a time, they surrendered to their sorrow until Menelaus suggested that they discuss the matter the next day, and for now, set aside their grief to enjoy the feast. This wise advice was accepted by all. A servant washed the guests' hands, and they resumed eating and drinking. Helen, skilled in many arts, secretly poured a magic powder into the wine. It was a remarkable spice, given to her by an Egyptian princess, with the power to numb all sorrow and bring joy, even if one had witnessed the death of a father, mother, brother, sister, or even a son. After drinking, they became cheerful. Helen entertained them with tales of Odysseus's cunning, recounting her own experiences. She told how, while she was still in Ilium, Odysseus had entered the city in disguise to spy on the Trojans. No one recognized him except Helen, to whom he revealed himself and shared the Greeks' plans. Menelaus then recalled how they had hidden inside the wooden horse and how they had barely resisted Helen's calls, which might have betrayed them had Odysseus not restrained them. As the evening passed in intimate conversation, Helen arranged comfortable couches in the hall for the guests, covering them with soft cushions and blankets. A herald guided them to their resting places with a torch, while Menelaus and his wife slept in the private chambers of the palace. Only in the morning did the host ask his guests about their business. Telemachus told him of the arrogant suitors and begged Menelaus for any news of his father. Menelaus said, after hearing the tale,
"Ah, it is as if a doe had left her young in a lion's den while she went to graze in the hills. When the lion returns and finds the intruders, he will tear them apart. Just so will Odysseus return to his home and bring a terrible end to those who have trespassed. If only they could see him in all his strength, as when he threw Philomelides in Lesbos, they would have no desire to court his wife. But dear youth, since you have asked me, I will tell you what the old seer Proteus in Egypt once revealed to me about your father. On my return voyage, the gods, in their anger, detained me for 20 days on an island at the mouth of the Nile. I had carelessly failed to make the required offering of atonement. Our provisions ran low, my men lost hope, and I might have perished with them had a goddess not taken pity on me. Idothea, the beautiful daughter of Proteus, looked upon us with compassion. One day, as I wandered alone, she approached me and spoke. I told her of my misfortune and begged her to tell me how I could gain the favor of the gods, discover who was blocking my journey, and find my way home across the endless sea.
Gladly, stranger, I will reveal a sure way. You must know that my father, the old sea god Proteus, knows everything. If you can catch him by some clever trick, he will tell you all that you wish to know.
And then I asked, "Good, but tell me, how can I capture him?"
Listen carefully. Every day when the sun reaches its highest point, my father rises from the sea and comes ashore to sleep in the cool caves. With him come the seals, basking in the sun on the shore. If you want to approach him unseen, you must hide in the skin of a seal and lie among them. I will help you. Come here early tomorrow morning with 3 chosen companions, and I will provide you all with fresh seal skins. When my father arrives, he will first count his seals, just as a shepherd counts his sheep. Then he will lie down among them. As soon as he falls asleep, it is time to act. You must seize him and hold him tightly no matter how he struggles. He will use all his powers to escape, changing form into fire, water, or fierce beasts. But you must not let go until he returns to his true shape. Then release him, and he will answer all your questions.
As soon as Idothea had spoken, she disappeared into the depths of the sea. I returned to my ship and spent the night anxiously awake. In the morning, I selected 3 men of proven strength and bravery to join me in this extraordinary task. We went to the designated place, and as promised, the nymph kept her word. She rose from the sea with 4 fresh sealskins, wrapped each of us in one, and showed us where to lie down. Friends, you cannot imagine our misery. The oily stench of the skins would have overwhelmed us if Eidothea had not rubbed sweet-smelling ambrosia on them to mask the foul odor. Thus disguised, we remained in our places all morning. At last, when the midday heat was strongest, the herd of seals emerged from the water, followed by the grey sea god himself. He looked around, examined, and counted his seals, including us, then lay down among them. Suddenly, we sprang up with loud cries and held him down with all our strength. Everything happened just as his daughter had warned us. He immediately changed his form to a lion to frighten us, but we held on even tighter. Then he became a panther, then a dragon, and then a wild boar. As we gripped what felt like bristles, he turned into water, trying to slip through our hands. When we blocked the water, he rose into the air as a towering tree. At last, the old sorcerer grew weary of his transformations, returned to his true form, and said,
Son of Atreus, what mortal has revealed to you the secret of capturing me? And what do you seek from me?
I explained my troubles, and he told me to return to Egypt and offer rich sacrifices to appease the gods I had offended. Only then would my return voyage succeed. I asked him one last question. What had happened to my friends? Had they all reached home safely? The god's reply filled me with sorrow. He spoke of Ajax's tragic fate and told me of my dear brother Agamemnon's brutal murder. My heart shattered, and I no longer wished to live. But the wise old god comforted me and urged me to hurry home to avenge the crime. Finally, I asked him about my dearest friend, Odysseus, and whether he was still alive. Proteus answered,
Odysseus lives, but he is trapped on a distant island, held captive by the nymph Calypso. He longs for home and weeps in sorrow, willing to risk the unknown waters just to return. But he has no ship and no men, and the nymph who loves him will never let him go.
With these words, Proteus vanished into the sea. I followed his instructions and arrived safely home. Now you know everything I can tell you. Stay with me for a while, and I will send you home with worthy gifts, 3 splendid horses and a beautifully carved chariot. In addition, I will give you a fine goblet, so you can make offerings to the gods and always remember me.
Telemachus declined the offer as he could not abandon his companions, who were waiting anxiously for him in Pylos. In the morning, the king prepared a generous farewell feast for the 2 young travelers, serving freshly slaughtered goats and lambs. But Telemachus would not have enjoyed this meal had he known the wicked plan being devised against him at home. The suitors were deeply disturbed to learn that Telemachus had dared to embark on this journey. Who could say whether he might return with support from Nestor or Menelaus and bring about their downfall? Until now, no one had thought much of the boy's courage. But now, it seemed as if his father's spirit had awakened in him. Antinous, the most arrogant of the suitors, declared,
No, we cannot allow him to challenge us. He must be eliminated before he becomes a real threat. Give me a ship and 20 brave warriors. I will ambush him in the straits between Ithaca and Samos. If I meet him there, he will never set foot in his home again. Then, everything will belong to us.
The other suitors applauded Antinous and conspired on how best to ensure Telemachus's death. Once their plan was settled, they sent the ship to the designated location to await his return. But Medon, the herald, overheard their plot. He hurried to inform Penelope of the terrible news. Her heart was already weighed down with worry, and upon hearing this new misfortune, her knees gave way, and she collapsed unconscious at the threshold of her chamber. Her maidens wept over her, and at last the beautiful queen found herself in tears. She moaned aloud, unable to contain her sorrow. At first, she thought of sending for her father-in-law, Laertes, but the old man was powerless to help. She considered other possibilities, but none would change the danger facing her son. At last, She turned to the only source of comfort left to her, calling upon the gods for protection. She prayed fervently to Athene, and when she finished, she felt renewed strength and calm. She lay down on her couch and drifted into a deep sleep. Athena heard her prayer, and not wanting to leave the noble queen without comfort, sent her a soothing dream. In it, Penelope's sister appeared and asked why she was in such distress. Penelope poured out her sorrows, and the dream figure reassured her.
Do not fear, sister, and cast away these anxieties from your heart. Your son will return safely. He has a powerful guide and protector. Pallas Athene herself is with him. She has compassion for both him and you, and she has sent me to bring you this message.
Penelope wished to ask more, but the vision faded. She awoke, reassured, and no longer mourned as deeply for the two loved ones she had feared lost. Chapter 3. Poseidon's Fury. Athene was busy preparing for Odysseus's return. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, fastened his golden sandals, which allowed him to soar like a bird through the sky. He took up his magical staff, which could both kill and restore life, and swiftly flew across the sea. Soon, he arrived at Calypso's distant island and was enchanted by the beauty of the place. The goddess's lovely dwelling nestled among the trees, with singing birds nesting in the dark foliage. The entrance to the grotto was framed with vines heavy with clusters of purple grapes. Surrounding it were lush meadows crossed by gleaming streams, with colorful flowers peeking through the greenery. Hermes paused to admire the beautiful scene before entering the grotto in search of Odysseus. The poor man, who found no peace on this enchanting island and was weary of the goddess's affections, went daily to the shore, sitting beside the waves and gazing over the dark waters toward his distant homeland. Meanwhile, the nymph sat at her loom, weaving a garment with a golden shuttle and singing cheerfully as she worked. As soon as she saw Hermes, she recognized him and was surprised by his arrival. He delivered Jupiter's strict command. She must release Odysseus, as the gods had decreed his return. This frightened Calypso, and she began to complain about the jealousy and cruelty of the gods. However, fearing Jupiter's wrath and punishment, she promised to obey. In the meantime, Hermes was treated with hospitality, for even the gods offered one another refreshment. However, they do not eat mortal food. Instead, they consume ambrosia and drink a divine liquid that poets call nectar. After feasting, Hermes repeated his message and then departed from the island. When Calypso had wept and mourned, she went to find Odysseus. She found him sitting, lost in thought, on the shore.
My dear friend, you must not spend your life in sorrow and despair. I will have mercy on you and let you go, but you must build your own vessel. Go into the forest, choose trees, cut and shape them with the axe I will give you, and construct a strong raft. I cannot provide rowers, but I will give you plenty of food, drink, and clothing. I will also send a gentle wind to carry you out to sea. If the gods will it, you shall soon reach your beloved homeland in safety.
Odysseus leaped up, his heart racing with joy and disbelief. He could hardly believe his good fortune.
Swear to me that you are telling the truth and not plotting new misfortune for me.
The goddess smiled and, to reassure him, swore the most sacred oath of the gods, by the earth, the heavens, and the river Styx. At last, Odysseus believed her. The next morning, he hurried into the forest. After 4 days of tireless work, his raft was complete, equipped with a mast, a rudder, and yardarms. Calypso provided the sail and stocked the raft with skins and baskets of fresh water, wine, and delicious food. On the 5th day, she walked with him to the shore, and he joyfully set sail. A gentle breeze filled his sail as he steered confidently across the vast sea, guided by the sun during the day and the stars at night. He traveled swiftly for 17 days, his heart lifted by the thought that he was drawing closer to his beloved wife and homeland. But on the 18th day, just as the island of Corfu came into view, Poseidon spotted the bold traveler, and his anger flared once more.
Aha! The gods must have protected him while I was away. But no matter, he will still face suffering and misfortune before he reaches the land destined for his refuge.
The angry words had barely been spoken when dark clouds began to gather at Poseidon's command. He dipped his trident into the sea, stirring it to its depths. Then he summoned the winds from their caves and set them against each other, casting a dark night over the waters. Odysseus trembled. He was alone on the vast sea. Land had disappeared, and as far as the eye could see, only dark waves surrounded him. The sea rose in towering swells before crashing down, lifting him toward the heavens one moment and plunging him into the depths the next. Clinging desperately to his raft, he was tossed back and forth. A violent gust of wind tore away the mast and sail. Then a massive wave as large as a mountain broke over the raft, submerging it completely. Odysseus lost his grip and was thrown into the sea. But when he surfaced, he saw the raft still floating nearby and managed to climb back onto it, escaping certain death. Yet the storm continued to rage, and there seemed to be no hope of rescue. However, fate had decided he would be saved. Leucothea, the sea goddess, saw him struggling in the furious waves and took pity on him. She emerged from the water, climbed onto the raft, and sat beside him. Leucothea said,
"Poor man, you must have greatly angered Poseidon, but he will not destroy you. You will be cast upon the shores of Scheria. Take this girdle and tie it around yourself. Then cast off your heavy garments, leave the raft, and save yourself by swimming. The girdle will carry you safely to land. But once you reach the shore, do not forget to throw it back into the sea."
With these words, she disappeared beneath the waves. Odysseus hesitated. He feared it might be a trick of Poseidon's to lead him to his doom. He decided not to abandon the raft as long as it held together, but he kept the girdle, ready to use it if necessary. His decision proved wise, for soon after, a massive wave shattered the raft into pieces. The logs broke apart, and Odysseus was thrown into the sea. Now it was a matter of life or death. He swam toward the largest piece of wreckage, grabbed hold of it, and straddled it like a horseman, gripping it tightly with his knees. As he drifted, he pulled off his heavy tunic and threw it into the water. Then he tied on the girdle and leaped into the sea, trusting in the goddess' words. As he struggled in the water, Poseidon watched him and said,
"This time you may escape death. But I hope you will not soon forget the horrors of this day."
With that, Poseidon left, and slowly the wild waves began to settle. The terrible storm had lasted for 2 days and 2 nights. Throughout this time, Odysseus had neither food nor water. Yet he kept swimming, supported by the divine girdle. His hope and joy returned when he saw the waves calming and the rocky coast of Scheria appearing before him. But his struggle was not over. The powerful surf kept hurling him back against the steep cliffs, making it impossible to land. This was even worse than his battle with the open sea. His hands, torn and bleeding, could barely hold on as he was forced to swim almost entirely around the island in search of a safe place to come ashore. At last, he reached a spot where a small river flowed into the sea. The beach was low, and the surrounding land shielded it from the wind. Odysseus, gathering his strength, prayed to the spirit of the river.
"Hear me, O ruler of these waters, whoever you may be, and have mercy on me. You see that I have escaped Poseidon's wrath. Now I place myself under your protection."
The river god heard him, and soon Odysseus sank to his knees on the soft green grass, kissing the blessed earth. But his strength was completely drained, and he collapsed into deep unconsciousness. His voice and breath left him. He was utterly exhausted. When he finally regained his senses, he gratefully remembered Leucothea and her instructions. He stood up, unbound the wet girdle, and, turning his face away, cast it into the sea. Then, cautiously and anxiously, he began to explore the island. The night was approaching and there was no one in sight. Naked and alone, he had no idea where to find shelter. The beach was cold and damp, but the forest before him might be filled with wild beasts. Still, he walked toward it, and soon came upon a cluster of wild olive trees. Their thick branches offered a natural refuge from the sun, rain, and wind. On the ground, he found a thick layer of dry leaves. Gathering them into a pile, he crawled beneath them, covering his body with the foliage. A deep sleep overcame him in his bed of leaves, and for a while he forgot his suffering. Scheria was home to a peaceful people who valued commerce and navigation more than farming or hunting. They had built a town near the harbor where busy workers could be seen constructing ships in the dockyards. Order, morality, and prosperity flourished, and the people were ruled by the kind and noble King Alcinous. He lived in a magnificent palace in the city, where the nobles gathered daily to offer sacrifices and feast with their king. While the weary Odysseus was sleeping, his protector, Athene, was devising a way to introduce him to the island's most important people. The king had a young and beautiful daughter named Nausicaa. One morning, as she slept, Athene appeared in her dreams, taking the form of one of her youthful companions, and began to scold her.
"Lazy girl, when will you think of washing the fine garments that are lying soiled around the house? You will soon be a bride, and what if your clothes are not ready? Get up quickly. Ask your father to provide a cart and donkeys to take us to the washing place. I will go with you, and we will take our maidens and wash and dry everything, so that your father and mother will be pleased with our hard work."
When Nausicaa awoke, she decided to follow the advice. She asked her father for the cart, and once it was ready, she loaded it with the dirty garments. Her mother prepared food and a skin of wine, and when everything was set, the young princess climbed onto the cart, took the reins and the whip, and drove out of the city, followed by her companions. The washing place was beside a clear stream where small canals and basins had been dug for the purpose. The maidens threw the clothes into one of the basins, undressed, and stepped into the water, where they stomped on the garments with their feet to clean them. Once washed, the clothes were spread out to dry on a beach of smooth pebbles beside the stream. After finishing their work, the girls bathed, anointed themselves with oil, and opened the baskets and wineskin to enjoy an outdoor breakfast. Then they sat together in a circle. Nausicaa began to sing while the maidens danced and played with a ball. When they had finished their games, they gathered the dry clothes, folded them neatly, packed them in the cart, and harnessed the donkeys to prepare for their return. Before leaving, the playful Nausicaa tossed the ball once more toward one of her companions, but it fell far into the river. The girls clapped their hands and burst into laughter, their joyful cries echoing along the shore. Athene had arranged everything so that these cheerful sounds would wake the sleeping Odysseus. He stirred, listening to the voices, rubbing his eyes and brushing the dry leaves from his hair and beard.
Those are human voices. But what kind of people might they be? Could they be rough barbarians who do not speak my language and know nothing of the gods or hospitality? But wait, those sound like the voices of young women. I must go and see for myself.
He crawled out of the thicket, shaking off the dry leaves. Since he was completely naked, he broke off a thick branch to cover himself. Thus, he emerged looking like a wild creature of the forest. When the maidens saw him from a distance, they screamed in fear and ran away. But Nausicaa was a brave girl, and Athene secretly strengthened her courage. She stood her ground and calmly waited for the stranger to approach. He came closer, but did not dare to embrace her knees in the manner of a petitioner. Instead, he spoke from a respectful distance.
Humbly, I approach you, goddess or maiden, for I do not know which you are. Your height and beauty make me think that, if you are a goddess, you must be Artemis. But if you are a mortal, then truly your parents and brothers are fortunate, for their hearts must be filled with joy when they see you dance. But happiest of all will be the man to whom your father gives you as a bride, the one who will take you into his home. I have never seen a human as graceful as a slender palm tree. Yesterday, the sea cast me upon this shore. I do not know where I am, and no one here knows me. I do not presume, noble maiden, to embrace your knees, but I beg you, have compassion on me. After all my suffering, you are the first person I have met. Show me the city where the people of this land live, and give me some rags to cover myself. May the gods reward you 1,000 times over. May they grant you all that your heart desires, a husband, a home, and a life blessed with harmony. For truly nothing is more precious than when a husband and wife live in peace, bound together by love.
These words pleased the kind-hearted Nausicaa, and she felt pity for the stranger. She told him her name and spoke of her father and mother, assuring him that he would be given hospitality. Then she called her maidens back and ordered them to take their guest to the river to bathe and refresh himself with food and drink. But Odysseus's appearance was too frightening. The girls hesitated, each pushing the other forward until they finally gathered the courage to lead him to the river. Nausicaa sent him some freshly washed clothes and a small amount of the oil they had brought. The maidens placed these items beside the stream and withdrew, allowing Odysseus to clean himself in private. The bath was desperately needed, as he was covered in mud from head to toe. But once he had bathed, he looked like a new man. Clothed in the fresh garments, he emerged before the maidens, appearing younger and full of life. They were astonished at the change. His face glowed with new strength, and he seemed taller and more handsome. His once matted hair now fell in shining curls over his forehead and neck, and his entire presence radiated nobility and charm. Nausicaa could not help but secretly wish that he might stay in Scheria and take her as his wife. The maidens placed food and wine before him, and he ate eagerly, for he had fasted for far too long. When he had finished, the group prepared to return home. Nausicaa climbed onto her cart while the maidens walked beside her. As long as they passed through the open fields, he remained with them. But as they approached the city, Nausicaa paused and turned to him. She instructed him to wait in a poplar grove until she had reached her home, only then making his way to her father's house. She wished to avoid unnecessary gossip, fearing that people might misinterpret her actions. She knew how the townspeople might talk, whispering amongst themselves about her, speculating that she had chosen a husband in secret and could not even wait for a proper courtship. They would say that she had favored a foreigner over the noble young men of her own land. Nausicaa, blushing at the thought, reminded herself that she had often criticized other girls for appearing in public with a man before their parents had given their blessing and before a proper wedding had taken place. She refused to let her own actions be seen in such a light. Nausicaa then gave Odysseus one final instruction. When he entered the royal hall, he was to approach the queen first, embrace her knees, and plead for her protection. If she favored him, then he could hope to see his home again. Only after that should he speak to the king. Odysseus carefully memorized her instructions, and waited in the grove until he was sure the maidens had reached the palace. In the meantime, he prayed to his protector, Athene, asking that she grant him kindness and favor among these unknown people. Chapter 4. The Games of Scheria. At daybreak, King Alcinous and his guest rose and went to the marketplace. They sat on 2 hewn stones, placed there for the princes when they gathered for discussions. No one else had arrived yet, but Athene, disguised as a herald, was already going from house to house, summoning the chiefs to a council. They arrived in groups and took their seats, while the townspeople gathered around to get a glimpse of the stranger. He stood among them like a god, for Athene had made him appear taller and his eyes more intense, so that he would inspire admiration and affection among the Phaeacians. When everyone was assembled, the king began to speak.
Hear me, noble lords of Phaeacia. This stranger, I do not know whether he comes from the east or the west, asks us to send him on his way. Let us quickly decide, for never has anyone come to me with a request that was not granted. Now arise, young men, and choose 22 among you. Launch a strong ship and prepare everything needed for the journey. Then come to my palace, where I will provide you with food and drink. And you, my fellow princes, grant me another favor. Come with me to my great hall, so that we may once again host our guest with honor. And so that song may not be missing from our gathering. Summon the divine singer, Demoticus.
The company dispersed to carry out the king's orders. When everything was ready, they gathered at the palace, which was filled with guests. Alcinous ordered 12 sheep, 8 swine, and 2 oxen to be brought from his stables. The young men began preparing the feast while the herald returned with the minstrel who would entertain the guests. The singer was blind, but his mind was filled with great stories, which he could recite with extraordinary skill while accompanying himself on the harp. The herald gently led him by the arm into the center of the gathering, placed a chair for him near a pillar, and hung his harp on a nail. He guided the blind man's hand to the seat, then set a table before him with meat, placed the bread basket nearby, poured him wine, and attended to the other guests as well. Once everyone had eaten their fill, the minstrel took down his harp and played a prelude. Then his voice rose, filling the hall with the echoes of distant battle cries, the clash of swords, and the thunder of charging hooves. He sang of the heroic deeds of the Trojan War, and the song stirred the hearts of his Greek listeners. Then he shifted to a new theme, celebrating the valor of 2 warriors whose fame surpassed all others, Achilles and Odysseus. For Odysseus, it was like a blade piercing his heart. Overcome with memories, he pulled his mantle over his head and hid his face, so the Phaeacians would not see his tears. King Alcinous, sitting beside him, heard his quiet sobs. When the minstrel paused, the king tactfully spoke.
My friends, I believe we have had enough of feasting and song. Let us go outside and display our skills in the games, so our guest may witness the talents of our people.
The company immediately rose and followed the king, while a faithful servant guided the blind minstrel. The marketplace was full of life. The nobles took their seats, the people gathered around, and the young men who were about to demonstrate their skills in wrestling, boxing, running, and throwing entered the great arena. First came a foot race between the king's 3 sons, Laodamas, Halius, and Clytoneus. Clytoneus won. Then came the wrestling competition, where the strongest contestant was Euryalus. Next was the long jump, followed by the discus throw, and finally, boxing. In this demanding sport, the handsome Laodamas emerged victorious. Laodamas declared,
Listen, my friends, shall we ask our guest if he is skilled in any of these games? He certainly has a noble figure. Look at his broad chest, powerful thighs, strong arms, and sturdy neck. His physique shows the strength of an experienced athlete, and he is in his prime.
The wrestler Euryalus agreed with him.
That is a good idea. Go and challenge him.
Laodamas did as suggested, but Odysseus refused.
My troubles weigh on me far more than feats of strength. My only thought is how to reach my home as quickly as possible. You do not know all that I have endured.
Euryalus mocked.
Well then, my friend, it is clear you are not an expert. You are no warrior. Perhaps you are just a merchant's agent, shipping goods and calculating profits.
Odysseus replied,
That is an unworthy remark. Truly, the gods distribute their gifts in different ways. A man of small stature may have great wisdom, while another with a godlike form may lack good sense. So it is with you. You are handsome, but you have little wit. Were you not so young and foolish, I would be angered by your rude words. No, believe me, I am no novice in these contests. I have competed with the bravest before misfortune struck me down. I have suffered everything a man can endure, both in battle and in storms at sea. But even so, I will not leave your challenge unanswered. Hand me the discus.
He took the heaviest of the metal discs, swung it by the strap several times in a wide arc, and then hurled it high into the air. It landed far beyond the marks of the other throwers. One of the spectators rushed forward and placed a marker where the discus had fallen. Returning to the group, he called out,
Hail to you, stranger! In this contest, no one will surpass you.
Odysseus declared,
Let the young men try to match my throw, and if any of you wish to compete with me in boxing, wrestling, or running, let him step forward. Phaeacians, I am ready. Let anyone come, except Laodamas. He is my host, and it would not be right to challenge the one who has welcomed and cared for me. But I will not refuse any of the others, and truly, I have no fear. I am skilled in all feats of strength, but when it comes to archery, I have yet to find my equal. Even among enemies, I can strike my target, and my arrow will bring him down. Only one man surpassed me when we fought before Troy, Philoctetes. But among all the others, I was the best. As for spear throwing, my aim is more precise than those who use bows. In running, however, one of you may well outpace me, for the hardships of the sea and my long fasting have greatly weakened me.
The Phaeacians fell silent. Not one of them dared to challenge the hero. Then the king spoke.
Worthy stranger, we believe your words, for you do not speak out of arrogance, but because the young man has insulted you. Listen to me, so that you may speak well of us when you return home. We do not excel in boxing or wrestling, but Jupiter has granted us great speed in running, making us swifter than all other peoples, and mastery over the sea. We also take great pleasure in feasting, music, and dancing, as well as fine clothing and warm baths. Now, let those among us who are skilled in dance step forward, so that the stranger may witness your talent. Someone, bring Demodocus his harp.
The young dancers took their places and began their performance, moving in precise steps and making astonishing leaps, while Odysseus admired their speed and skill. The melody of the harp provided a beautiful accompaniment to their movements. Soon, the old minstrel struck up a lively comic song, causing the audience to burst into laughter. After the choral dance had gone on for a while, Laodamas and Halius danced alone, drawing admiration from all. One of them threw a ball high into the air, almost touching the clouds, while the other leaped and caught it before his foot touched the ground. Odysseus was impressed by their agility and grace, and he praised them, which greatly pleased their father, the king. Determined to send the stranger home with great honor, King Alcinous proposed that each of the 12 chiefs of Phaeacia present Odysseus with a gift of gold, along with a finely embroidered robe. Even the disrespectful Euryalus was required to apologize and offer a gift to make amends. everyone agreed to the king's proposal. As his offering, Euryalus brought a bronze sword with a silver hilt and an ivory scabbard. Approaching Odysseus with his eyes lowered in shame, he spoke.
"Do not be angry, stranger. May the winds carry away the foolish words I have spoken. May the gods grant you a swift return to your home and family after your long wanderings."
Odysseus replied,
"My friend, may you also enjoy the favor of the gods, and may you never regret the gift you have given me."
He slung the sword over his shoulder, and all resentment was forgotten. By then the evening had arrived. Servants brought the gifts to the marketplace, and they were carried into the palace. The princes also gathered there, taking their usual places in the hall. Alcinous asked the queen to have a warm bath prepared for their guest, while he selected the gifts he intended to present to him. A large kettle of water was brought, and the maid stacked wood and lit a fire beneath it. The queen herself carefully packed the costly gifts into a chest, which Odysseus secured with a clever knot he had learned from the powerful Circe. He then went to bathe, enjoying the warmth of the steaming tub. When he had dried himself, the maids anointed him with oil and dressed him in a magnificent tunic and cloak. Just as he was about to return to the festive hall, he felt soft hands on his arm. It was the lovely Nausicaa, whom he had not seen since the previous day. She had learned about his upcoming departure and wished to look upon him one last time. So she had quietly come down the stairs and waited for him at the door. He appeared before her, his noble features radiating strength, dignity, and power.
"Hail to you, guest, when you are home again. Remember the girl in Scheria to whom you once owed your life."
She lowered her gaze, barely holding back her tears. Odysseus replied,
"If the gods grant me a safe return, I will remember you and praise your name as if you were a goddess, for you have saved my life, gentle maiden."
Saddened, Nausicaa returned to her chamber, while Odysseus entered the hall and took his seat. Servants brought roasted meat and poured drinks for the guests from large pitchers of milk. A herald led the blind minstrel to his place. Odysseus motioned for the herald and cut a rich piece from the meat before him. Odysseus said,
"Take this to Demodocus. Though I am poor, I wish to honor him, for minstrels deserve our respect. The muse herself has taught them and granted them her favor."
Demodocus gladly accepted the offering. Once everyone had eaten, Odysseus turned to the minstrel and requested that he sing of the wooden horse, the cunning trick by which Odysseus had deceived the Trojans. The singer began his tale, unaware that the very hero whose cleverness he was praising sat before him. As the song unfolded, Odysseus often sighed and wiped away tears. Alcinous noticed his sorrow and, with careful tact, interrupted the minstrel.
"Our guest listens in tears. A deep grief weighs on his heart. Let the singer pause, so that we may all remain joyful. The stranger who comes to us in trust is as dear to us as a brother. Now, friend, tell us truthfully what we wish to know. Speak. What is your name? Who are your parents? Where is your homeland? We must know this if we are to guide you there, which we shall gladly do, though an ancient oracle has warned us that jealous Poseidon may one day sink our ship upon its return from such a journey. Tell us, too, where you have traveled and the people you have met. Share all of this with us, and tell us why you weep when the minstrel sings of Troy."
Chapter 5. The One-Eyed Giant. The company sat in silent anticipation, watching the stranger closely as he began to speak.
"The land of the Phaeacians is indeed a wonderful place, and I know no greater pleasure than sitting in the banquet hall while heralds move from table to table, filling the cups, and the minstrels sing splendid songs of the heroic deeds of brave men. For harp and voice are the ornaments of a feast, but you ask me for my unfortunate story. Where shall I begin? The immortal gods have brought much suffering upon me. Let me first tell you my name, so you may know me and remember me. I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to many through my great exploits.
The Phaeacians were struck with astonishment, and the old minstrel regretted that he had lost his sight, unable to look upon the man whose heroic deeds he had so often sung. This warrior, the most famous among all those who fought at Troy, had eaten and drunk with them, and was now about to tell them of the incredible feats he had performed and the hardships he had endured.
Yes, I am Odysseus. My home is the sunny island of Ithaca. I will not speak of the sorrowful war. When it ended, I set sail with my comrades for Ismarus, the city of the Ciconians. We sacked the city, slew the fleeing men, and divided the women and other spoils among us. I advised my men that we should leave quickly, but my foolish companions did not listen. As long as they had enough plunder, wine, sheep, and goats, they feasted on the shore. This brought our first disaster. The defeated Ciconians called upon their allies from the inland regions, who gathered in great numbers and attacked us in brutal revenge. The fierce battle at our ships began at dawn. At first, we held our ground against their overwhelming numbers, but by sunset, we were forced to retreat. Each of my ships lost 6 men, and it was only with great difficulty that I escaped in swift boats with the rest of my crew. Relieved to have survived, we sailed westward, staying near the coast of Greece. Then a terrible storm arose, breaking our masts and tearing our sails. With great effort, we managed to reach the shore to make repairs. On the 3rd morning, we set sail again with renewed hope, but another storm came upon us from the heights of Malaya and drove us far out into the open sea. For 9 days we drifted before the relentless north wind, and on the 10th day we were cast upon the land of the lotus eaters. They are gentle people and live in great fortune, for they possess a fruit called the lotus, which is sweeter than honey and serves as their daily food. Whoever eats it forgets their home and wishes to stay there forever. We landed to collect fresh water, and soon the lotus worked its magic. I had to force my companions back to the ships, tie them up with ropes, and throw them under the rowers' benches. If I had not left quickly, not a single man would have followed me. We rowed out again into the vast sea and landed on a wooded island near the coast of Sicily, uninhabited except for countless herds of goats roaming the lowlands. These animals had no fear of men, so we had an easy hunt and gathered plenty of food. After eating and resting, I became eager to explore the neighboring island, which appeared large and fertile. We could hear voices from across the water and see cattle grazing on the hills. It was the land of the Cyclopes, a race of giants, a savage people who know nothing of agriculture, have no laws, and fear neither gods nor men. I told my comrades, "Stay here with the ships. I will cross in my own boat with 12 chosen companions to explore the land." I took with me a large skin of excellent wine, for I suspected that we might encounter savage people who could not be won over with reason or kind words. So I prepared myself with this sweet and deceptive drink. On our arrival, I carefully hid my ship in a secret cave and landed with my men and my wineskin. Not far away, I saw a huge cave in the rock, surrounded by a wall of large stones and shaded by a row of enormous firs and oaks. It was the home of the most fearsome giant, where he spent the night with his goats and sheep, for caring for his flocks was his only occupation. He was the son of Poseidon, and his name was Polyphemus. Like all the Cyclopes, he had one single terrible eye in the middle of his forehead. His arms were so strong that he could move rocks, and he could throw granite blocks through the air as easily as one might toss pebbles. He roamed alone among the mountains, for none of the other Cyclopes communicated with him. He was savage and took pleasure only in mischief and destruction. I, an unfortunate man unaware of his nature, went with my companions straight to the open cave and entered it. We did not find him there because the sun had not yet set, and he was still grazing his herds on distant hills. The stalls were full of lambs and young goats. There were baskets and tubs of cheese and milk, along with curds in large vessels and milking pails. My companions were eager to fill several baskets with cheese, drive off many lambs and goats, and quickly escape with them in our ships before the dreaded king of the cave returned. But I forbade them from doing so, for I was too curious to see the man and hoped, as is the custom among hospitable people, to receive a gift from him. How mistaken I was. We sat down in the cave, lit a fire as an offering, and passed the time eating cheese until the Cyclops returned. In the evening he appeared with his entire herd at the mouth of the cave. We recoiled in fear, and at first he did not see us. He carried a huge load of wood on his shoulders and dropped it onto the ground with a clatter that made the rocks tremble, forcing us to flee into the deepest parts of the cave. Then he drove his goats and sheep inside and blocked the entrance with a massive rock that even 22 wagons could not have moved. We became prisoners in the power of the monster. We were able to watch him without being noticed for a while as he sat comfortably on the ground to milk the animals, then poured the milk into tubs, and finally stoked the fire. Suddenly the flames leaped up, and he discovered us huddled together in a corner. For a moment he stared at us, then thundered in a frightening voice, "Ho, strangers! Where do you come from? Are you traders or robbers who roam the seas without sparing human life?" Our knees trembled at the sound of the monster's voice. However, I quickly regained my composure and answered boldly, "We are Greeks returning from Troy, cast upon this coast by storms. As misfortune has overtaken us, we beg you to shelter us and to please the gods by sending us on our way with gifts. Honor the gods, noble sir, for Jupiter is the avenger of all wrongs committed against travelers." "Oh, you foolish stranger," roared the Cyclops. "You seem to know nothing of the Cyclopes. No one here honors the gods, and we know nothing of your Jupiter, for we are far greater ourselves. But tell me, where did you land with your ship?" I sensed his deceit and decided he must not outsmart me. "My ship," I said aloud, "was lost. Had we still had it, we would not be here. The waves destroyed it, and if we had not been able to swim, we would all have perished." As soon as he finished speaking, the cruel Cyclops stretched out his arms, grabbed 2 of my companions, and smashed them against the ground. Their blood and brains splattered everywhere. He tore them apart and ate them. We screamed in horror at this dreadful sight and prayed to Jupiter. But our cries did not move the Cyclops. He drank a whole tub of milk and then lay down to sleep. What should I do? I asked myself as the monster began to snore. Shall I plunge my sword into his heart before he wakes? But no. If I killed him, who would move the massive stone blocking the entrance? Only the giant himself had the strength to do it. If I struck him down, we would be trapped and starved to death. I had to think of a better plan. So we spent the night in terror, waiting for the dawn. At sunrise, the Cyclops woke and went about his routine. He added fresh wood to the fire, milked his herd, and let the young ones drink. Then, once again, he grabbed 2 of my dear companions, killed them, and ate them. Afterward, he pushed back the stone, drove his flocks outside, and rolled the great rock back into place. Once again, we were imprisoned for the entire day. I then came up with a plan to avenge my fallen comrades and escape. I would blind the Cyclops with a red-hot stake. I found the perfect piece of wood for this purpose. It was the giant's own club, made of fresh olive wood, as long and thick as a ship's mast. I cut off a section, and with the help of my companions, smoothed and sharpened it. Then I hardened the tip in the glowing embers of the fire. When the weapon was ready, I carefully hid it under a pile of straw. Next, we drew lots to decide which of my men would help me drive the stake into the sleeping giant's eye. Then, trembling with fear, we waited for his return. Finally, he came back, driving his flocks inside. This time, he left no animals outside, either because he suspected us or because a god had willed it so. He rolled the great stone back into place, milked his sheep and goats, ate 2 more of my unfortunate men, and threw more wood onto the fire. Now it was time for my plan. I took out the wineskin and approached him boldly. "Here, Cyclops," I said, filling a jug. "Try this drink. Wine tastes good after a meal of human flesh. Take it, so you may see what fine drink we had on our lost ship." He took the jug and drank. Delighted, he emptied it in 1 gulp and said with a grin, "Pour me another and tell me your name, so I may give you a gift. This is a wonderful drink. We have wine here, but it is nothing compared to yours. It tastes like water. Give me more." I filled his jug 3 times, and he drank eagerly. Soon I saw with satisfaction that he was becoming drunk. Then an idea struck me. "You ask my name?" I said. "My name is Nobody. My father and mother call me Nobody, and so do all who know me." "Good," he said. "Then Nobody shall be the last one I eat. That is my gift to you." With these words, he collapsed onto his back, overcome by drunken sleep. He tossed and turned, but soon his heavy snores told us he had completely lost consciousness. Our time had come. I quickly pulled out the stake, thrust its end into the fire, and let it heat until it was glowing red. Then I called my companions to help. A god filled our hearts with courage. Together we seized the blazing stake and, in an instant, drove it into the Cyclops' enormous eye. As when a blacksmith plunges hot iron into cold water, so did the Cyclops' eye sizzle as the fiery stake burned into it. We twisted it deeper, and thick blood gushed out, streaming over his face. The giant let out a terrible roar and jumped up, thrashing wildly. We scattered into the corners of the cave to avoid his flailing hands. In his agony, he yanked the burning stake from his eye and hurled it against the cave wall, howling like a mad beast. The other Cyclopes, awakened by his screams, rushed to the cave and gathered outside. The other Cyclopes gathered outside the cave and shouted, "What has happened to you, Polyphemus? Why do you roar so loudly? Has someone stolen your sheep or tried to kill you?" "Woe is me," the Cyclops groaned. "Nobody has tricked me. Nobody has attacked me." "Well, if nobody is attacking you, we cannot help. We have no power over the pains that come from within. You must call on your father Poseidon for aid." With that, they left. My heart rejoiced that my false name had fooled them. However, we were still in great danger. Though we had escaped the grasp of the blind giant, he now sat in front of the entrance, rolled the stone back slightly, and stretched out his hands, hoping to catch us as we tried to slip out among his sheep. But I had a plan to trick him once more. Among the flock were some strong, thick-fleeced goats. I took 3 and tied them together with flexible branches. Underneath the middle one, I securely fastened one of my men, while the other 2 shielded him on either side. As for myself, I chose the largest and woolliest ram, the leader of the flock, and clung beneath him. Thus prepared, we waited for morning. At last, the flock crowded toward the exit, passing their blind master. He ran his hands over their backs, trying to feel if any of us were riding on them. But he never thought to check beneath. One by one, my men escaped, hidden under the animals. I was the last. As the great ram walked past, I clung tightly to his thick wool with both hands and feet. The Cyclops stroked his favorite ram and spoke to him in sorrow. "My dear little one, why are you the last to leave the cave today? You always trot so proudly at the front of the herd. Are you grieving for your master's eye, which that villain nobody has destroyed? But do not worry. He will not escape. If only you could speak, you would tell me where he is hiding, and then I would crush him so his blood would flow across the cave floor. That would be sweet revenge. He let the ram go, and as soon as I was far enough away, I released my grip and sprang to my feet. Quickly I freed my remaining men. Only 6 of us had survived. We herded some of the best sheep toward our ship as a reward for our suffering. The Cyclops rolled the stone back into place and whistled for his flock, unaware of our escape. We rushed toward the shore, loaded the sheep onto the ship, and pushed off as fast as possible. When we had rowed far enough that our voices would still carry, but we were safely out of reach, I could not resist calling out to mock him. Cyclops, know that you have not eaten mere nameless men. You have feasted on the comrades of Odysseus, and now you pay the price for your cruelty. He was furious. He tore off a massive rock and hurled it toward the sound of my voice. He aimed well. It crashed into the sea beside our ship, sending waves surging around us. The force of the water nearly pushed us back to shore, but I shouted to my men, urging them to row with all their might, and we escaped to the open sea. I could still see the giant clutching his bloody forehead, and despite my men's pleas to remain silent, I could not resist taunting him again. Hear me once more, Cyclops. If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes. The Cyclops groaned in agony. Cursed guest, he shouted. So the prophecy has come true. I always feared that a mighty giant, someone far greater than me, would come and take my sight. But instead it was a weak little man, a mere mortal who had outwitted me. Woe is me. But listen, Odysseus, he added, his tone suddenly changing. Come back, and let us make peace. I will welcome you as my guest and pray to my father Poseidon to grant you a safe journey home. He will surely restore my eye, and all will be forgiven. At my shout, I heard the Cyclops praying loudly to his father, asking him to send misfortune upon me. Unfortunately, Poseidon heard and answered his plea. In the meantime, we kept rowing as fast as we could, but we were still in danger. The Cyclops threw another massive rock, and it crashed into the sea, creating waves that nearly overturned our boat. At last, after a long and difficult effort, we reached our small island. There we rejoined our companions, who had given us up for loss and had spent days and nights mourning for us on the shore. Overjoyed at our return, they gave me the large goat that had carried me out of the cave. As my share of the spoils, I sacrificed the animal to Jupiter, and we all feasted and drank together, celebrating our survival. When the sun set, we lay down on the beach and slept.
Chapter 6. Circe's Spell.
Once we had recovered our strength and satisfied our hunger, we launched our ships and set sail again. We traveled until we reached a strange island, unlike any we had seen before. This land floated on the water and was surrounded by a great wall of brass. It was the legendary island of Aeolus, the ruler of the winds. The gods had given him control over all the winds, allowing him to release or restrain them at his will. Aeolus welcomed us warmly and entertained us for an entire month. He lived in a magnificent palace with his 6 sons and their beautiful wives. Each evening they gathered in a great hall to feast, and they eagerly listened as I told them of Troy and all that had happened during my difficult journey. When the time came for me to leave, I begged Aeolus for his help in ensuring a safe return home. He agreed and gave me a precious gift, one that would have ended my long wanderings if not for the foolishness of my crew. He captured all the dangerous winds inside a sturdy leather bag, securing it tightly with a silver cord. This way, no storm could drive us off course, and I could release the winds only when needed. With a gentle breeze guiding us, we left Aeolus's island and sailed across the Mediterranean. For 9 days and nights we traveled without trouble, and on the 10th evening I finally saw the shores of my beloved Ithaca. I could make out the fires burning on the hills. It was truly my homeland. At last my journey was at an end. Exhausted from my efforts to steer us home, I surrendered to sleep, certain that we would arrive safely within hours. While I slept, my companions began whispering among themselves. They complained that they had suffered greatly but had gained nothing, while I had gathered treasures from Troy and received gifts from every land we visited. "Everywhere he goes," they murmured, "he is honored and given fine presents, while we return empty-handed. What could he be hiding in that bag? Surely Aeolus must have given him a fortune in gold and silver." Their curiosity got the better of them. Thinking the bag contained treasure, they secretly untied the silver cord. The moment they did, the winds burst free, howling and raging, and our ship was thrown violently off course. The storm dragged us back across the sea to the very place we had just left. Desperate and heartbroken, we landed once more on Aeolus's island. My men were exhausted, and after eating and drinking, I took one of them and my herald with me to beg the king for help again. When I arrived at his palace, I found him and his family gathered at their feast. They were shocked to see me return. I told them what had happened and pleaded for their aid once more. But Aeolus frowned and spoke in a terrible voice. "Unfortunate man, the gods themselves are against you. I cannot help one so cursed. Leave my island at once." Sorrowfully, I returned to my men, and with heavy hearts we set sail once more. We rowed continuously for 6 days, and on the 7th we reached the land of the Laestrigones. We found a quiet harbor where we moored our ships. Then I climbed a hill to look for signs of life. In the distance I saw smoke rising and sent 2 men and a herald to explore. They followed a path through a forest and came upon wagon tracks that led to a town. There, they met a young girl fetching water. She was the daughter of the king, Antiphates. When they asked about the land, she pointed them toward her father's grand palace. But when they entered, they were terrified. The queen was a giantess, towering like a great tree, and at her call the monstrous king appeared. Without a word, he seized one of my men and devoured him on the spot. The other 2 ran for their lives, fleeing toward our ships. We saw them running, and soon a horde of giants followed in pursuit. As we tried to push off, enormous boulders came crashing down upon us, destroying our ships and crushing our men. It was a massacre. I had tied my own ship behind a rocky outcrop, hidden from sight, and so it was spared. With no time to waste, I cut the ropes, shouted for my remaining men to hurry, and we rowed frantically out to sea. From a distance, we watched in horror as the Laestrigones speared the last of our unfortunate comrades and carried them away for their gruesome feast. The current now carried us toward the island of Aiaia. We drifted into a sheltered bay and remained there, weak from exhaustion and hunger, for 2 days and nights. But on the 3rd day, as the dawn painted the sky with rosy light, I seized my spear and sword and climbed to the highest peak on the island. The gods took pity on me, for at that very moment a great stag with magnificent antlers crossed my path. Without hesitation, I hurled my spear into its side. The animal let out a cry and collapsed. Bracing my foot against its body, I pulled out my spear, tied its legs together, and hoisted it onto my shoulders. Staggering under the heavy load, I carried it back to my starving men, determined that we would not perish from hunger. "Come, my friends," I cried. "We shall not descend into the kingdom of Hades until the day of our doom arrives. As long as we have food and drink, let us be merry and refresh our weary bodies." The sight of the large stag revived the spirits of my exhausted comrades. They jumped up, washed their hands, and eagerly prepared the meat. We sat down to an excellent feast, and our courage returned. A deep sleep refreshed us, and at daybreak we decided to explore the island. However, my companions hesitated, remembering the horrors of the Cyclops and the cannibal Laestrygons. "Very well," I said. "Let us divide into 2 groups. I will lead one, and the brave Eurylochus will lead the other." We then drew lots from a brass helmet to decide who would explore and who would remain behind to guard the ship. The lot fell to Eurylochus, and he set out with 22 men. In a distant valley, they discovered the magnificent palace of Circe, the daughter of the sun god, a sorceress skilled in magic. Surrounding her dwelling were lions and wolves, once men who had been transformed by her spells. Although they had been turned into beasts, their human minds remained intact. They did not attack the approaching men, but came up to them like friendly dogs. Inside the palace, Circe sat at her loom, singing. "Listen," one of the men said. "What beautiful singing! Let us go inside." The goddess, having overheard them, stepped away from her work and opened the door. Circe said sweetly,
"Come in, strangers. Let me welcome you."
The men obeyed and entered. Only the cautious Eurylochus stayed outside, hiding from the sorceress, as if sensing danger. She invited the men to sit on soft cushioned chairs and served them food and sweet wine. However, she secretly mixed her wine with a potion that would rob them of their will. As soon as they drank, she touched them with her magic wand, and instantly they were transformed into grunting swine. Laughing, she drove them into pens and locked them inside. From his hiding place, Eurylochus witnessed this horrifying scene. He fled in terror, running as fast as he could to bring me the dreadful news. Breathless and trembling, he told me what had happened. Without hesitation, I jumped up. "Lead me there at once," I demanded. "I will avenge our comrades if I cannot save them." But Eurylochus fell at my feet, begging through tears. "Do not throw your life away. Let us flee this cursed island while we still can and escape the same terrible fate." "Stay if you wish," I replied scornfully. "Eat and drink here by the shore, but I must go." With these words, I hurried toward Circe's dwelling, striding along the beach. As I neared her palace, a radiant figure suddenly appeared before me. I recognized Hermes by his shining staff and divine presence. Hermes said, taking my hand,
"My friend, why do you wander alone in these wild hills? Do you realize what awaits you? Your companions have been imprisoned in Circe's pens, transformed into swine. Do you intend to free them? Poor man, I fear you will only join them. Listen, I wish you well, and I can help you. Let me warn you of Circe's tricks. When you arrive, she will mix a sweet wine laced with a powerful drug to put you under her control. But take this herb. It will protect you from her magic."
Hermes handed me a plant with a milky white flower and a black root.
"This is moly. Its power will prevent Circe's spell from affecting you. When she sees her potion has failed, she will try to bewitch you by touching you with her wand. At that moment, draw your sword and act as if you will strike her down. She will be terrified and beg for mercy. Agree to spare her, but only if she swears a solemn oath not to harm you further. If you do this, she will be subdued, and you will gain her trust. Over time, you can persuade her to release your friends."
With that, Hermes vanished, soaring toward the heavens. I gazed after him in gratitude, carefully stored away the magical herb, and committed his words to memory. Deep in thought, I soon reached Circe's palace. Her sweet singing still filled the air. I called out, and she immediately appeared, smiling as she welcomed me. She led me inside and invited me to sit in a silver-mounted chair. As she prepared the wine, she secretly mixed in her enchanted potion. When she handed me the cup, I pretended to drink, but before taking a sip, I secretly added the moly that Hermes had given me. Without fear, I swallowed the drink. As soon as I drank, Circe pointed her magic wand at my head and commanded,
"Now, my little beast, go join your friends in the pig pen."
But I did not change. Instead, I pushed back my chair, sprang up, and rushed at her with my sword as if to strike. She screamed and threw herself to the ground, clutching my knees.
"Who are you, and where do you come from? You are the first to resist my magic. No mortal has ever withstood its power. Are you, perhaps, the cunning Odysseus, the man Hermes once told me would visit me on his long journey and render my sorcery useless? But do not look at me so fiercely. Put away your sword. Sit down beside me, so we may speak as friends."
"O goddess," I answered, "how can I trust someone who has stolen my friends? I do not know what schemes you are planning against me. If you truly mean no harm, swear the great oath of the gods that you will not use any magic against me, neither while I am awake nor in my sleep." Without hesitation, she swore the oath, and I felt reassured. She then pulled me down beside her on the couch, speaking gently, while her maidens, the beautiful daughters of river and forest gods, prepared a feast. One of them heated water for my bath. When it was ready, Circe herself washed my head and shoulders and dressed me in rich garments. Then she led me to a table covered with delicious food. But I could not eat. I leaned my head on my hand and fell into deep sorrow. Circe urged me to take part in the feast, but I refused. "O goddess," I sighed, "how can I enjoy food in a house where my unfortunate companions remain prisoners? Until I see them freed from this terrible enchantment, you will not be able to comfort me with your kindness." Circe was moved by my words. She went to the pens, freed the swine, and anointed each of them with a healing salve. Oh, joy! The bristly hides and long snouts vanished, and my companions stood before me, younger and stronger than before. They cried out in relief and fell at my feet in gratitude. Circe then led them into the banquet hall. Circe said to me,
"Listen, Odysseus. Stay with me for a while and rest after all the suffering you have endured. Beach your ship on the sand, hide your weapons and treasures in the thicket, and bring all your worthy companions here. I will welcome them."
Trusting the sacred oath she had sworn, I immediately set out to find my remaining men. When they saw me returning safely, they ran toward me like young foals rushing to their mother. I told them all that had happened and ordered them to pull the ship onto the shore, store our weapons safely, and follow me to the palace, where they would be able to rest and feast. But then Eurylochus, still paralyzed with fear, spoke up.
"Poor fools, where are you going? That cunning witch will turn us all into swine, wolves, or lions. Did Odysseus not lead us into the Cyclops' cave? And now he wants us to walk straight into another trap. Let us stay here, and let him go if he wishes."
I burned with rage at his cowardice. In my fury I drew my sword, ready to strike him down, but my companions stopped me. "Let him stay," they said, "but we will follow you." So I led them to Circe's palace, and even Eurylochus, despite his fear, followed from a distance. When they entered the hall and saw their lost companions, dressed in fine garments and seated at a grand feast, they were overcome with joy. They embraced one another, and even Circe was touched by the sight. Circe said,
"Dear friends, stay here until you have forgotten your past hardships and regained your strength."
Gratefully, we accepted her offer. Day after day, we ate, drank, and rested. But after a full year had passed, the longing for home stirred in our hearts once more. My men came to me, pleading that we return to Ithaca. All day I pondered their request. When night fell, I went to Circe, knelt before her, and begged her to let us go home. Circe responded,
"I do not wish to keep you here against your will, but before you can take the direct path home, you must first complete an important task. I ask you to journey to the Underworld and seek out the spirit of Tiresias. Persephone, queen of Hades, has granted him alone the power to retain his wisdom after death. He will tell you how to reach your homeland.
Hearing this, I groaned in despair. I sat beside her, weeping. "Who will guide me there?" I asked. "No living man has ever traveled to Hades and returned to the land of the living," Circe assured me.
Do not fear for your life or your journey. Raise your sail and let the north wind carry you.
She then gave me careful instructions about what I would see and do in the land of the dead. By the time she finished speaking, dawn was beginning to paint the sky. With a heavy heart, I rose and woke my companions, informing them that we would set sail at once. They were filled with sorrow at the thought of leaving Circe's comforts for such a dreadful journey. Still, we made our way to the ship. On the shore, we found the sacrificial animals she had prepared for us, a black male sheep and a female, along with flour, wine, and honey.
Chapter 7, Shadows of the Underworld.
We pushed our ship into the water, raised the mast, and sailed into the unknown, carried forward by the wind. Eventually, we reached the land of the Cimmerians, where the sun never shines. There, we beached our ship, took the offerings, and walked to the place Circe had described. Everything was exactly as she had foretold. With my sword, I dug a pit, 1 ell wide and deep. Into it I poured offerings for the dead, first honey and milk, then sweet wine, and finally water, sprinkling white flour over it all. Then I took the 2 sheep, slit their throats, and let their dark blood flow into the pit. At once, spirits of the dead rose from the underworld. They crowded toward the pit in restless waves, young maidens, old men burdened with sorrow, warriors still bearing the wounds of battle. Their cries filled the air, and a terrible fear gripped me. I drew my sword and held them back, not letting them drink the blood until I had spoken with Tiresias. Meanwhile, my men skinned the sheep and burned them as a sacrifice, praying to the gods of the underworld. I, too, prayed fervently, vowing further offerings if I ever returned home safely. The shadows pressed in from all sides, reaching for the blood, wailing in hunger. I stood firm, my sword raised, awaiting the spirit of Tiresias. The spirits were silent, except for Tiresias. He asked me to put away my sharp sword, so that he could drink the blood and prophesy my fate. When he had drunk, he leaned on his golden staff and began,
"Brave Odysseus, you want to go home, but one of the gods will make your journey hard. Don't you know how angry Poseidon is because you blinded his son? Still, you might succeed if you leave the sacred cattle of Helios, alone on the island of Thrinacia. If you or your men harm those cattle, you'll barely survive. Even if you do make it home, it will take many years, and all your companions will die. When you finally return, you will find others have taken your wealth, are trying to marry your wife, and are plotting to kill your son. But eventually, a god will help you, and you'll be able to kill these evil suitors in your own palace. After that, you'll have to leave your home and travel far inland. You'll know you've found the right place when you meet someone who mistakes the oar on your shoulder for a farming tool. There, away from the sea, you'll live to old age and die peacefully."
"So that is my fate, O Tiresias," I said. "But tell me, do I not see my mother among the spirits? She does not speak to me or look into my face. How can I make her recognize me?" Tiresias answered,
"If you want to speak with any of these spirits, let them drink the blood. Once they do, they will be able to think clearly and talk to you."
I waited for my mother to approach, and as soon as she had drunk, she recognized me with joy and astonishment. I told her all about my suffering and asked how she had died, as well as the state of my father, my wife, and my dear son at home. She told me they were alive and longed for me every day. My father, now weak with age, no longer lived in the palace but worked in his vineyard in the countryside. She departed, and other women took her place, wives of great heroes I had once known. They too drank the blood and told me of their fate. My heart swelled as I beheld the spirits of dear friends who had once fought beside me before Troy, Agamemnon, Achilles, Patroclus, and the mighty Ajax, all of whom had died before seeing their homeland again. I was most shocked to see Agamemnon there. I asked him what had happened, and in sorrow he told me of his tragic fate. He inquired about his son, Orestes, but alas, I knew nothing of the Greeks. However, I was able to tell Achilles of his son, Neoptolemus, whose bravery in war I had often witnessed after his father's death. Even in the realm of the dead, Achilles took pride in his son's valor, and his spirit drifted proudly down to the fields of Asphodel, where the shades of great heroes dwell. I also saw the legendary heroes of old. Minos, the wise ruler and lawgiver of Crete, was still delivering judgment over the souls of the dead in Hades. Orion, the great hunter, roamed the underworld with his mighty bow, driving endless herds of game before him. I saw the torments of those who had been punished for their crimes. Tityus, the enormous son of the earth, who once dared to violate the goddess Leto, lay fastened to the ground while two vultures tore at his liver, which endlessly regenerated, so that his torment would never cease. No less terrible was the punishment of Sisyphus, a cruel king in life. He was doomed to push a massive boulder up a steep hill, but each time he neared the top, it would slip from his grasp and roll down into the valley. Exhausted, covered in sweat and dust, he would begin his hopeless task again. I also saw Tantalus, the once honored king, whom Zeus had allowed to feast at the table of the gods. But his arrogance made him unworthy of this privilege, and he betrayed the gods' trust. Now, in the underworld, he suffered an unending torment. He stood in a pool of water up to his throat, yet whenever he bent down to drink, the water vanished. Above him hung branches heavy with sweet figs, apples, and pears, but when he reached up, the wind would snatch them out of his grasp. His thirst and hunger were eternal, yet he could never satisfy them. I saw the shade of mighty Heracles, though he now lived in Olympus among the gods, married to Hebe and enjoying divine pleasures as a reward for his earthly labors. His shadow still wandered the underworld. I also glimpsed the spirits of Theseus and Pirithous drifting in the distance. I did not dare to stay much longer in this dreadful place. Filled with everything I had seen and heard, I hurried back to the ship with my companions. We all boarded quickly, and Oceanus carried us back the way we had come. As soon as Circe heard of our return, she came to us and provided plenty of bread, meat, and wine. When night began to fall, she sat beside me, away from the others, and gave me wise advice for the journey ahead. She warned me about the sirens who lure travelers with their beautiful songs, only to devour them like wild beasts. Circe warned me,
"You won't be able to resist the sirens' beautiful singing, so here's what you must do. Take this wax and make it soft. Use it to plug your crew's ears so they can't hear anything. As for you, have your men tie you firmly to the ship's mast. When you hear the siren song, you'll beg to be freed, but tell your men to tie you even tighter. There's an even more dangerous place ahead, where two huge cliffs form a narrow channel. In these waters live two monsters, Charybdis and Scylla. Charybdis creates a massive whirlpool at the base of one cliff. She swallows ships whole and later spits out their broken pieces. Stay away from her side. Instead, sail closer to the right cliff where Scylla lives. She's also dangerous. She has 6 heads, and each one will grab one of your crew members. But it's better to lose 6 men than to lose everyone to Charybdis. Finally, when you reach the island of Thrinakia, Don't touch the sacred cattle that belong to the sun god Helios. If you or your men kill even one of these animals, terrible things will happen. Your ship will be destroyed, your crew will die, and even if you survive, you'll spend many years struggling to get home, and you'll return alone.
Thus spoke the glorious goddess, and as the rosy light of Eos appeared in the sky, we hurried to our ship to take advantage of the favorable wind. When I believed we were approaching the sirens, I softened the wax and sealed the ears of my men, but I had them tie me tightly to the mast. Then we rowed forward. The sirens, hearing us approach, began their enchanting song. As I listened, an overwhelming desire took hold of me. I struggled to free myself and begged my men with frantic gestures to untie me, but they only bound me even tighter, until at last the magical voices faded into the distance, and we had passed the danger. Soon we saw mist rising and waves crashing violently ahead. In the distance we heard a deep, echoing roar. Fear gripped the rowers, and they stopped in terror. I moved among them, urging them to row as fast as they could, while I commanded the steersmen to keep as far to the right as possible so we would not be sucked into Charybdis. But I said nothing about the terrible Scylla, for I knew that if they heard of her, they would stop rowing in despair. As I stood on the high deck, gripping 2 spears and staring into the foaming abyss, I suddenly heard a scream of agony from my right. Looking over, I saw the horrifying monster had seized 6 of my strongest and bravest men, each caught in one of her 6 gaping jaws. They called out to me for help, but there was nothing I could do. At last we had passed through the dreadful strait and saw the green hills of Thrinacia. From the distance we could hear the lowing of Helios's sacred cattle and the soft bleating of his flocks. Helios, the sun god, had placed these herds under the care of 2 nymphs and took great pleasure in watching them as he drove his golden chariot across the skies. The herds never grew larger or smaller, nor did they age. "My friends," I said, "this is the cursed island. I can already see the beautiful cattle of Helios, and we have been warned that touching them means certain death. Let us heed the warnings of Tiresias and the divine Circe. Let us not set foot on this island, for they have foretold that the most terrible fate awaits us here." My companions were displeased with my words and began to complain. Eurylochus spoke for them.
"Odysseus, you are fearless but too harsh. You never grow tired, but we are exhausted from our struggles, and yet you refuse us rest. You would have us row blindly into the night. Let us land, take food, and rest beside the ship. At dawn, we can set out again."
Everyone agreed with Eurylochus, and I realized that the gods were determined to bring about my downfall. So I said to them, "You may force me, a single man among many, to obey, but you must first swear that none of you will harm the sacred cattle. Be satisfied with the provisions given to us by the divine Circe." They swore the oath quickly, and the steersman guided us to shore. We disembarked and ate our supper, mourning the terrible loss of our companions. It was late before sleep finally ended our sorrow. But what an awakening awaited us! During the night, a violent storm arose, and thick black clouds covered both land and sea. When morning came, we pulled our ship into a rocky cove and sheltered ourselves as best we could. "Friends," I said, "we will not be able to leave this island today, but we still have food and drink. Swear to me once more that none of you will touch the sacred cattle." Again they all promised. But for 4 long weeks the south wind and the fierce east wind took turns blowing, preventing us from setting sail. When our provisions were finally gone, my companions searched the shore for shellfish and hunted birds. But it was not enough to satisfy their hunger. I too wandered far from the ship, washed my hands in the sacred sea, and prayed to the gods to show me a way home. After I prayed, a deep sleep overcame me, and I collapsed on the shore. While I slept, my companions made a fateful decision. They chose to break their oath. Eurylochus said,
"If Zeus has decided we must die, I would rather perish at sea in an instant than starve slowly on this island. Come, let us take some of the oxen, sacrifice them, and promise to build a temple for the sun god when we return to Ithaca."
Just as the fat meat of the slaughtered cattle sizzled on the fire, I awoke and hurried toward the camp. The scent of roasting meat filled the air, and my heart sank with despair. It was too late to stop them. The nymphs had already carried the news to Helios, and the enraged god threatened that if he was not given proper restitution, he would no longer shine upon the world. In response, Zeus promised to destroy my ship as soon as I set sail again. What suffering still lay ahead? For 6 days my companions feasted on the sacred cattle, but on the 7th day, when the storm had finally passed, we boarded the ship and sailed quickly toward home. We had not gone far when a terrible west wind rose, bringing dark thunderclouds. The raging sea tossed our small vessel violently until, with a mighty crack, the mast snapped and fell, dragging the steersman into the waves. Then a terrifying bolt of lightning struck, splitting the ship in two. All my companions were thrown into the water, struggling briefly before they were swallowed by the sea. I alone survived, clinging desperately to the keel of the broken ship. When the drifting mast floated near me, I tied it to the keel with the remaining ropes, trying to keep myself afloat on this wretched raft. But I had little hope of reaching land, especially when a south wind suddenly pushed me straight toward the Strait of Scylla. The current pulled me directly into the deadly whirlpool of Charybdis. It seemed certain that I would perish, but at the last moment I saw a fig tree growing over the chasm. Just as the whirlpool tried to pull me under, I reached out and seized the tree's slender branches, clinging to it like a bat, my feet finding no place to rest. I watched helplessly as my raft was swallowed into the abyss, knowing that, in time, Charybdis would spit it back out. I held on, waiting for that moment, and when at last it resurfaced, I let go of the tree and threw myself onto the battered wood. The current carried me safely out to open waters. The storm had ended, but for 9 days I drifted helplessly, paddling with my hands, weak with hunger. On the 10th day, I finally reached land, the island of Ogygia, where Calypso kept me captive for 9 years, as I have already told you.
Chapter 8. The Return to Ithaca. All eyes remained fixed on the speaker as the audience listened in admiration to the incredible adventures of Odysseus. His trials and endurance had captivated them, and a sense of reverence filled the hall. Recognizing the extraordinary hardships their guest had endured, Alcinous proposed that they honor him even further. He called upon the 12 princes to each contribute a bronze tripod and a silver basin as part of their gifts. His words met with unanimous agreement, and with that decision, the gathering dispersed for the night. At daybreak, they assembled once more, each noble arriving with the promised gifts. Alcinous himself took special care to oversee the final preparations, personally tending to the ship and ensuring that every provision necessary for the journey was in place. Once all was ready, they returned to the palace, where a grand farewell banquet awaited. The occasion was marked not only with feasting, but also with a solemn sacrificial offering, a final act of honor before Odysseus would set sail toward his long-awaited home. Longing for home, Odysseus spoke to the king.
Noble hero and mighty King Alcinous, and you, princes of the Phaeacians, send me on my way now, for I have all that my heart desires. May the gods bless your gifts and my return, and may they bring you good fortune.
After completing the final rites of hospitality, Odysseus turned to Queen Arete. Handing her his cup, he said,
"Goodbye, Queen Arete. I hope you live a long and happy life in your palace with your family and your people until old age comes. as it does to us all."
With that, he hurried to the ship and lay down to rest, while the rowers took their places and began to row. Odysseus fell into a deep sleep, forgetting all his troubles. As the morning star rose, the ship reached one of Ithaca's bays. Even the jolt of landing did not wake Odysseus. The Phaeacian youths carefully carried him ashore, placed all his gifts beside him under an olive tree, and then returned to their ship. They set sail joyfully for home, but they could not escape the wrath of Poseidon. The god saw them returning and, in his anger, turned their ship into stone in the middle of the sea and surrounded the city of Ithaca with high cliffs. Meanwhile, Odysseus awoke but did not recognize his homeland, for Athene had covered it in a thick mist.
"Oh no, where am I? Have the Phaeacians tricked me and taken me to the wrong place? I better count my gifts to make sure everything is still here."
He counted them and found that nothing was missing. As he wandered along the shore, Athene appeared before him, disguised as a handsome young shepherd. Odysseus was overjoyed and greeted the stranger.
"Greetings to you, the first person I have met in this unknown land. Please, I beg you, tell me where I am. What country is this? Who lives here? Is it an island or part of the mainland?"
The youth replied,
"You must have come from very far away if you do not know this land. It is famous. True, it is rough and mountainous, not suited for horses, but it produces plenty of grain and wine. It is rich in cattle and sheep, well watered by streams, and covered in magnificent forests. Even in Troy, they speak of Ithaca, though they say it is far from Achaean lands."
Odysseus, ever cautious, concealed his true feelings, not wanting to reveal his identity. Odysseus said,
"Yes, I have heard of Ithaca before, in Crete, where I was born. I am a refugee. The Phaeacians brought me here with these goods, for I killed a king's son who tried to take my share of the spoils from Troy. Because of that, I had to leave my wife and child."
Athene interrupted with a smile and transformed into a tall, radiant woman of heroic beauty.
"Enough! You are still the same cunning Odysseus I have always protected. Do not jest with me, for we know each other well. I am Pallas Athene, and I have come to advise you on how to punish the arrogant suitors in your house. For 3 years, they have courted your faithful wife, bringing her marriage gifts, but she has rejected them all. She still holds your image in her heart and longs desperately for your return."
"Oh, goddess, it is hard to recognize you in human form, true. You have appeared to me often in battle and in times of need. But lately I feared you had abandoned me and that I would never see you again. But tell me, how can this be Ithaca? I do not recognize it."
"I never forgot you, but I did not want to oppose the mighty Poseidon, my great uncle who sought revenge against you. I also knew that total destruction was not your destiny. Now I will show you the land."
With that, Athene lifted the mist, revealing the country clearly before them. Odysseus fell to the ground and joyfully kissed the sacred earth. With uplifted hands, he prayed to the nymphs, the divine protectors of the land where he now stood.
"Now, Odysseus, let us hide your treasures so that no one can steal them."
She entered the grotto of the nymphs, while Odysseus handed her each item. She carefully stored them away and then rolled a stone over the low entrance. Afterward, they sat beneath the old olive tree, and Athene gave him important advice. Although she promised to help him, she warned him to proceed cautiously, as the suitors in his palace numbered over 100. Above all, no one should know of his return until he secretly discovered who his true allies were and ensured that he had enough support. To help him remain unnoticed, she planned to disguise him so that no one would recognize him or suspect the presence of Ithaca's rightful king. She gently touched him with her staff, and immediately he transformed into an old man. His skin shrank, deep wrinkles formed, his hair turned white, and his eyes became pale and watery. His long flowing robes changed into a coarse tattered shirt, while his cloak turned into a shabby deerskin. To complete his beggar's disguise, she gave him a large sack and placed a knotted staff in his hand. Dressed in this manner, she instructed him to visit the good swineherd, Eumaeus, who was loyal to him and opposed the suitors. From him, Odysseus could learn more details about the situation at home. Meanwhile, Athene would hurry to intercept young Telemachus, who was returning from Sparta and was being ambushed by the suitors' ships. She planned to foil their scheme and hoped to reunite father and son soon. With this, they parted, and Odysseus climbed the steep path leading to the dwelling of the loyal swineherd. Eumaeus was the chief of all the king's herdsmen and had 4 men under his command, tending to the flocks. At that moment, the swineherd was sitting outside his hut, cutting leather to make sandals for his next trip to the city. 4 fierce-looking dogs lay beside him. When they saw Odysseus approaching with his beggar's pack, they leapt up, barking furiously, and rushed toward him. Odysseus quickly dropped his staff and crouched down to protect himself, but the dogs would have attacked him had the swineherd not rushed over, throwing stones and shouting to control them. Eumaeus said,
"In truth, old man, you barely escaped being torn apart, and that would have brought me great shame and sorrow. I have enough troubles already. I sit here grieving every day for my dear master, while I am forced to send his finest swine to the wicked men in his palace. Meanwhile, he may be wandering as a beggar in a strange land, if he is even still alive. But come inside my hut where I can offer you bread and wine, and you can tell me who you are and where you come from."
With these words, he led Odysseus into the hut and prepared a bed of straw covered with goatskins for him. Moved by his kindness, Odysseus said,
"May Zeus grant you what you most desire, my friend, in return for the kindness you have shown me."
No guest should ever be turned away, stranger, no matter how humble. All strangers are under the protection of Zeus. My hospitality may be meager, but you know how little a servant has to give. If my good master were still here, things would be different. He would have ensured my old age was taken care of in return for my years of loyal service. But my master is gone. Oh, how I wish the entire house of Helen had perished for the misery they caused so many brave men.
With that, he tucked up his long robe, went to the pigsties, and selected 2 fat piglets. After slaughtering them, he slowly roasted them over the fire and laid the meat before Odysseus. Then he mixed wine in a wooden cup and placed it beside him.
Here, stranger, eat and drink the best we shepherds have to offer. The suitors who fear neither gods nor men feast on the fattened pork. The gods have always hated violence, yet even thieves sometimes fear divine punishment. But these men, these cursed suitors, fear nothing, and still the gods have delayed their punishment. They must have learned somehow that Odysseus has perished, or else they would not be so bold in their recklessness. No king around here was as wealthy as Odysseus. He owned 12 herds of cattle and just as many sheep and goats. Now, each of the shepherds is forced to send daily offerings of the best animals to the palace. If this continues, his wealth will soon be gone.
The listener was outraged by what he had heard but hid his feelings. When he finished eating, he said,
"What would you think, my friend, if I brought you good news? Tell me the name of your wealthy and powerful master. I have traveled far, and perhaps I can tell you something about him."
Don't bother telling me anything. I know he won't come back. Who knows where he died? I miss him terribly. He meant more to me than even my own parents did.
Listen, my good friend, I will swear to you a sacred oath that Odysseus will return. When he comes, you shall give me a fine tunic and a cloak as a reward for my good news. I do not ask for them now, even though I am in need, for I despise a man who lies for personal gain, even if desperation tempts him. But hear me well, everything I now foretell shall come true. When the present moon has waned and the new one begins to grow, Odysseus will be at home and will have punished all those who have disrespected his wife and son.
Enough, old man. Drink and speak of something else, and may the gods forgive you that oath. My heart is filled with sorrow. I'm also troubled about the boy, the noble Telemachus, whom some evil spirit convinced to travel abroad in search of news about his father. I hear that the shameless suitors are waiting to ambush him when he returns, so that the family of Archesios may perish. But now, old man, tell me about your own troubles.
Odysseus, ever cunning, claimed that recounting the full extent of his suffering would take an entire year. With a practiced ease, he launched into tales of his adventures and feats of bravery, weaving a narrative designed to stir both sympathy and admiration. When he finished, the swineherd sighed.
Unfortunate man, you have moved my heart. But why do you lie about Odysseus, who will never return? You will not gain my favor that way. If I show you kindness and hospitality, it is only in honor of Zeus and out of sympathy for your hardships.
You have an untrusting heart. You do not even believe my sworn oath. But let us make a bargain. I will stay here until Odysseus arrives, and when he does, you shall send me to Dulichium with a proper cloak and tunic. But if he does not come, then you and your herdsmen may bind me and throw me off this rock.
The gods forbid that I should ever do such a thing. I could never pray to Zeus again if I violate the sacred laws of hospitality.
As they spoke, evening fell, and the other herders returned with their animals. There was a loud commotion as the pigs grunted and squealed, and it took a long time before they were all safely settled in their pens. When all was in order, the swineherd commanded his men to bring in a fattened 5-year-old pig to serve their guest. While the men were outside, Eumaeus chopped wood, laid it on the fire, and made everything ready. When the meal was prepared, the good swineherd divided it fairly. He split each portion into 7 parts, setting aside the first for the nymphs and Hermes, while the rest were shared among his guest, his 4 servants, and himself. The old man was given a large piece of the fat back, the portion of honor traditionally given to a guest. After supper, night fell, and a fierce west wind howled around the hut. The rain poured down in torrents. Odysseus shivered in his tattered clothes, but Eumaeus did not seem to realize that he needed a warmer cloak. The hero decided to use a clever trick to see if he could get one.
Listen, Eumaeus, and you, shepherds, the wine has made me merry, and I must tell you an amusing tale. Perhaps it is not the right time, but since I have started, I will finish. One night, Menelaus, Odysseus, and I planned an ambush near the city wall. We took only a few men with us. As night fell, we lay down in a thicket among reeds and swamp grass. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a fierce north wind blew. Snow began to fall, and soon our shields were covered in ice. My companions were better off than I was. They had their cloaks to wrap around themselves and used their shields for warmth. They slept soundly, feeling nothing of the storm. But I had left my cloak behind and was lying there in my thin tunic, soaked by the rain. My teeth chattered, and I shook as though I had a fever. Finally, past midnight, when I could no longer endure the cold, I nudged Odysseus, who lay beside me, and whispered, "Noble Odysseus, I am freezing to death. I left my cloak behind. Please think of a way to help me." "Stay quiet," he whispered back. Then, raising his voice, he woke the others. "Listen, friends," he said. "I have had a memorable dream. We are too few in number and too far from the ships. Someone should run to Agamemnon and tell him to send reinforcements." Thoas, the son of Andraemon, immediately volunteered. He got up and set out, leaving his purple cloak behind. Odysseus picked it up and tossed it to me. Laughing, I wrapped myself in it and slept soundly until morning. You see, my friends, I was thinking that if I were now as young and strong as I was then, perhaps someone would give me a cloak for the night, either out of kindness or out of fear of my strength. But of course, a man dressed in rags is always looked down upon.
The men laughed, entertained by the stranger's cleverness, while Eumaeus, impressed by his wit, acknowledged the aptness of his words. He agreed to provide a cloak for the night, but made it clear that it would need to be returned in the morning, as shepherds had little to spare. If Telemachus were to return, he assured, the young master would provide proper garments and arrange for the stranger's journey home. With that, Eumaeus prepared a bed near the hearth, layering sheep and goat skins for comfort and covering it with the borrowed cloak. The servants lay down beside Odysseus, but the swineherd himself remained outside. Choosing duty over rest, he settled in a rocky cleft sheltered from the north wind, keeping careful watch over his herds. Odysseus, observing his host's unwavering devotion and loyalty, felt a deep sense of admiration for the good man. Chapter 9. A journey ends, a battle begins. Meanwhile, Athene continued to look after her favorites. That same night she went to the palace of Menelaus in Sparta to warn Telemachus to return home and to alert him of the dangers awaiting him.
When you near the shores of Ithaca, have your companions row straight to the city, but you yourself should go alone to the hut of the loyal Eumaeus and spend the night there. Let him go to the city to inform Penelope of your safe return.
With these words, the goddess disappeared. At dawn, Telemachus rose and met Menelaus, who was also up early. He immediately asked for permission to depart. Menelaus answered,
"Far be it from me, dear youth, to keep you here against your will. But at least wait until I can give you parting gifts and have the women prepare a meal, so that you may set out strengthened and refreshed."
Menelaus ordered the maids to prepare a feast quickly, then went into his treasury to select a farewell gift. Helen also opened her chest, where she kept beautifully embroidered garments she had made herself. She chose the largest and finest one for Telemachus. Menelaus followed her with a golden goblet and a silver pitcher, presenting them with the words,
"May Zeus grant you a safe journey. I give you the most valuable thing I own, a gift from the king of Sidon when I passed through Phoenicia. Truly, it is a masterpiece, as if crafted by Hephaestus himself."
Helen spoke as she handed over the magnificent robe.
"I also wish to give you a gift. Let this adorn your bride on your wedding day. Until then, let your noble mother keep it safe in her chest. Farewell, and may you return in peace to your father's land and your stately home."
Telemachus gratefully accepted the splendid gifts, passing them to Pisistratus, who admired them silently before carefully storing them in the chariot. With their departure imminent, they joined Menelaus in the hall for a final banquet. As soon as the meal ended, the two young men made their way outside, eager to begin their journey. Menelaus accompanied them to their chariot, holding a goblet of wine in his hand. With a firm handshake, he bid them farewell, wishing them well on their travels and sending his greetings to Nestor, whom he fondly recalled as a dear companion during the war at Troy. With their parting words exchanged, Telemachus and Pisistratus set off, traveling swiftly toward Pylos. As they neared the city, Telemachus turned to his companion with a request to take him directly to his ship on the beach, so that noble Nestor would not delay him with his generous hospitality. Time was of the essence, and he needed to depart without further delay. Pisistratus readily agreed, and upon reaching the shore, Telemachus was welcomed back by his companions, who rejoiced at his return. Without wasting a moment, they made the necessary preparations, ensuring the ship was ready for departure. Once everything was in place, Telemachus took his position at the rudder, offering a silent prayer as he poured a libation into the sea, invoking Athene's favor for a safe voyage. With steady strokes, the oarsmen rowed into the calm, quiet night, their journey home underway. Meanwhile, far from the grand halls of Sparta and the bustling shores of Pylos, Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar, sat in the humble hut of Eumaeus, the faithful swineherd, sharing a simple meal in quiet companionship.
Listen, Eumaeus, I have been a burden to you long enough. Tomorrow morning I plan to go into town. All I ask is that you provide me with a guide to show me the way to the palace of Odysseus. I want to bring news to Penelope and mingle with the suitors to see if they will treat me kindly.
What are you thinking, old man? You would fare badly among those men whose arrogance knows no bounds. They will abuse you without hesitation. You are no burden to me. Stay at least until Odysseus' son returns. He will surely provide you with the proper cloak and tunic and arrange for a ship to take you wherever you wish to go.
Kind swineherd, may Zeus bless you as I bless you for offering me shelter and rest after my many hardships. Since I must stay, tell me of noble Odysseus's mother, and what of his elderly father?
At this, the swineherd began speaking of Laertes and the noble queen, who had long since died from sorrow and was laid in the grave. Around them, the other servants had already retired for the night, their quiet breathing filling the hut. As midnight approached, Eumaeus turned to his guest, acknowledging that it was time to rest. Yet, he admitted, there was a certain comfort in sharing grief with another, especially with someone as wise and pleasant to speak to. The burdens of the heart felt lighter when shared, and though the night was deep, there was always time enough for sleep. That same night, the ship carrying Telemachus safely reached the island, having escaped the notice of the spies. It landed on the northern coast, and with the first rays of the rising sun, Telemachus disembarked with his companions and made a sacrifice. The young man had no idea how close his father was at that very moment. He fastened his shining sandals, took his heavy lance, and prepared to part from his companions. He ordered them to row to the city and arranged a meeting for the next day at his father's palace, where he would reward them for their journey with a grand banquet of meat and wine. However, Telemachus had one more concern. In Pylos, a soothsayer from Argos named Theoclymenus had joined him and asked for passage on his ship. They had gladly brought him to Ithaca, but he wished to travel farther. Telemachus, fearing the suitors, did not dare bring a guest to his own house. Together, they considered where the stranger could stay. Telemachus suggested that Eurymachus, the most arrogant of the suitors, would be a suitable host since he was the most powerful man on the island and could provide hospitality before sending the guest on his way. Telemachus said,
"He is now, in my father's absence, almost the supreme ruler here. He is determined to marry my mother so that he may take control of my family's wealth, claim the title of king, and secure the highest seat in the assembly, which rightfully belongs to my house. Only Zeus knows whether he will succeed or not."
Just as he spoke, a vulture flew past them on the right, holding a dove in its talons. As it tore at the dove mid-flight, white feathers fell to the ground between Telemachus and his ship. Theoclymenus quickly took Telemachus aside and spoke softly.
"My friend, what you have just said will never come to pass. This omen from the gods reveals that your family will always rule over the princes of Ithaca."
Telemachus's heart was filled with joy at this prophecy. He bid farewell to the stranger, and one of his men led Theoclymenus to the house of Eurymachus. Meanwhile, Telemachus set out for the swineherd's hut, just as Athene had instructed him. By the time Telemachus arrived at the swineherd's enclosure, the sun was already high in the sky. The shepherds had taken their flocks and herds into the fields and forests, leaving Eumaeus sitting inside with Odysseus by the fire. They had just finished roasting meat for breakfast when Telemachus appeared in the gateway. At the sight of him, the dogs ran joyfully to greet him. Eumaeus was so astonished that he dropped his cup and rushed forward, embracing the young man with tears streaming down his face. He looked at Telemachus as if he had risen from the dead, unable to speak for a long time. Finally, overwhelmed with emotion, he expressed his joy and relief, confessing that he had feared never to see him again after hearing of his journey to Pylos. Urging him inside, he lamented how rarely Telemachus visited him, preferring instead to stay in the city among the suitors. Telemachus, brushing aside the old man's words, reassured him that such matters were unimportant at the moment. His true purpose for coming was to ask whether his mother had accepted one of the suitors and abandoned their household. Eumaeus, shaking his head, assured him that Penelope remained steadfast, mourning day and night just as she had when he left. As they entered the hut, Odysseus, still in disguise, felt his heart swell with joy at the sight of his son, but struggled to contain his emotions. Out of respect, he rose from his seat to offer it to Telemachus, but the young man quickly stopped him, insisting he remain where he was and assuring him that he would find another seat. Eumaeus brought out the remains of their meal, and the three sat down to eat and drink together. After some time, Telemachus turned to the swineherd with an important request. He asked him to go to the city and secretly inform Penelope of his safe return from Pylos, warning him to be discreet, as many of the suitors were plotting against him. Eumaeus agreed without hesitation, fastened his sandals, took up his staff, and set off toward the city. As Odysseus watched him go, he saw through the half-open gate the figure of a tall, slender maiden beckoning to him. The dogs cowered in the corners, but Telemachus did not notice her. Odysseus immediately understood that it was the goddess Athene and stepped outside to meet her.
Noble son of Laertes, the time has come for you to reveal yourself to your son. Take counsel with him about how you will rid your house of the suitors. I will soon return to aid you.
As she spoke, she touched him with her golden staff, and instantly his ragged clothes became a fine purple cloak. His wrinkled face became smooth and strong, and his bald head was covered with thick, shining brown hair. Odysseus stepped back inside the hut, no longer a beggar, but looking like a king. Telemachus stared at him in astonishment and hesitantly said,
"Stranger, you have changed. I feel that a god is near. Have mercy on us, Holy One. Gladly will we offer you sacrifices and gifts."
No, I am not a god. I am your father, the one you have mourned for so long. I am Odysseus.
With joy, he embraced his son and kissed him.
Do not doubt any longer, my son. The transformation was not my doing, but the work of Athene, who watches over me. The gods can glorify or diminish a mortal as they please. Yes, I am Odysseus, who has wandered far for 20 years. And you, my beloved son, are my greatest joy. Holding you here in my arms is my happiest moment.
He could say no more, overwhelmed with emotion. Father and son wept together, embracing tightly. Again and again they gazed at each other in silence, before breaking into fresh tears of joy and gratitude. Eventually, father and son began asking each other tender questions, but they had to postpone long conversations for later. Now, they had to focus on the urgent matter at hand. They spent a long time making plans, with Odysseus instructing Telemachus on how to proceed and how to act when he arrived at the palace. Meanwhile, the ship that had carried Telemachus had sailed around the island and entered the harbor near the city. The crew pulled the ship onto the shore. One loyal companion carried Telemachus's gifts away, while another ran straight to Odysseus's palace to tell Queen Penelope that her son had returned. However, in his excitement, he foolishly shouted the news in front of the suitors. They gnashed their teeth in anger at the failure of their plot and quickly slipped away to secretly plan their next scheme. Shortly after, the faithful Eumaeus also arrived to deliver his message privately, but he soon realized he was too late. The news had already spread. Without delay, he returned to his hut, reaching home in the evening. By then, Athene had once again disguised Odysseus in his beggar's rags, so Eumaeus remained unaware of what had happened in his absence. He quickly chose a year-old pig for the evening meal, served his guests with care, and, after their meal, they all retired early, gratefully accepting the gift of sleep. At daybreak, Telemachus rose, fastened his sandals, and took up his lance. As he prepared to leave, he bid farewell to Eumaeus, explaining that he needed to return to the city, for his mother would not stop worrying until she saw him. He also instructed the swineherd to bring their guest to his house, where he could try his luck, assuring him that he would not lack help there. Odysseus, still in disguise, found the plan agreeable. He remarked that a beggar could fare better in the city, where many wealthy people lived, rather than in the countryside. However, the morning air was cold, and his thin rags offered little protection. He requested a moment by the fire to warm himself before setting out. Without delay, Telemachus made his way to town, arriving before the suitors had gathered at his house. Following custom, he placed his lance outside the door against a pillar and stepped inside. There, he found the old servant Eurycleia dusting and arranging the cushions. The moment she saw him, she ran to him, tears streaming down her face. The other maids also rushed to him, showering him with kisses on his face and shoulders. Soon after, Penelope entered and embraced her son, holding him tightly as she wept. She clung to him for a long time, overcome with emotion, pleading for news of his journey and what he had learned. Telemachus, however, urged her not to press him for details just yet, explaining that he had barely escaped death. Instead, he instructed her to bathe, put on fresh garments, and go to the housetop to make a vow to the gods, offering them thanks and seeking their help in avenging the shame that had been brought upon their household. As for him, he intended to go to the marketplace and retrieve the stranger who had traveled with him. He left, and his mother obeyed. As Telemachus crossed the marketplace, he saw all the suitors gathered there. They greeted him pleasantly, but their hearts were full of deceit. He did not join them but sat with the few older men who had remained loyal to his father and answered their curious questions. When he spotted the seer Theoclymenus, he quickly stood up, took him by the arm, and led him to his house before the arrogant suitors arrived. While Telemachus was entertaining his guest, Penelope entered with her women. She sat down to spin and listen to her son's story of his journey. However, he did not reveal the secret of his father's arrival, so her longing remained unfulfilled. Still, she found comfort in the words of the seer, who assured her that signs pointed to her husband's imminent return. Just as she rejoiced in this news, a loud commotion arose from the suitors outside. They had been amusing themselves by throwing quoits and had now stormed into the hall to feast and drink as usual. Disturbed, she went to her chamber, and the seer also left the hall. Meanwhile, the servants began slaughtering cattle, goats, swine, and sheep in the courtyard, preparing a feast for the suitors. Odysseus remained at the swineherd's hut until noon. The road to the city was long, winding through the mountains and passing a well where the maidens came to fetch water. An altar stood nearby, where travelers made offerings to the nymphs of the spring. At this well, the goatherd Melanthius crossed paths with the two travelers. He was an insolent and unfaithful servant, always ready to support the suitors in their schemes. He despised the swineherd and all honest men. The moment he saw Eumaeus walking with a ragged beggar, he mocked them.
"It is true what they say. One beggar leads another. How the gods bring light together! Where are you taking this starving wretch, you miserable swineherd? Will he stand at the palace doors in his filthy rags, disgusting the noble guests, rubbing his shoulders against the doorposts and begging for scraps? If you give him to me, I'll have him clean out the stalls and make beds for the young goats. Maybe then he'll put some flesh on his bones. But of course, beggars always find easy bread. I tell you, if you take that wretch to the palace, he will have nothing but bones and joints thrown at his head."
As he spoke, he gave Odysseus a sharp kick. Odysseus considered whether to strike him down immediately. It would have been easy, but he decided to hold back, pretending to be weak and fearful. Eumaeus, however, stood up to the goatherd and prayed aloud to the nymphs at the well, asking them to bring Odysseus home to punish the scoundrel. To avoid him, the two travelers let him go ahead with his goats. As Odysseus and Eumaeus neared the royal palace, the disguised beggar gazed at it with deep emotion. The towering battlements, the high, impenetrable walls, and the sounds of festivity from within stirred something within him. This, he remarked, could only be the grand home of a rich and powerful king, undoubtedly belonging to Odysseus himself. Pausing at the entrance, he instructed Eumaeus to go in first, while he would follow shortly. As they stepped into the courtyard, Odysseus's attention was drawn to a frail, aging dog lying in a corner atop a pile of dung. The animal was thin, weak, and covered in vermin, yet something in its form was familiar. Many years earlier, before departing for Troy, Odysseus had trained this very dog for hunting. As a playful puppy, Argos had often run beside him, full of energy and strength. But in his absence, no one had cared for the creature, and now, too feeble to move, the once mighty hunter struggled even to lift his head. Yet at the sight of Odysseus, the old dog stirred. His ears twitched, and his tail gave a feeble wag. He made a desperate attempt to rise and go to his master, but his legs trembled and gave out beneath him. The sight of his once loyal companion, now reduced to such misery, overwhelmed Odysseus, and he quickly turned away to hide his tears. Seeking composure, he asked Eumaeus about the dog, noting his strong build and wondering if he had once been swift. The swineherd confirmed that Argos had indeed been a remarkable hunter in his prime, trained personally by Odysseus. There was no prey fast enough to escape him, and his master had cherished him above all others. But without proper care, he had been left to wither away, another victim of a household where servants grew careless when their master was absent. Eumaeus stepped into the house, and Telemachus, noticing his arrival, immediately called him over and offered him bread and meat. Meanwhile, Odysseus entered the hall unnoticed and settled near the door. For a while, no one paid him any attention, but Telemachus, aware of his presence, quietly sent him some food. The disguised king placed the offering on his tattered wallet and ate in silence, while the minstrel filled the hall with the sweet strains of his harp. As the song came to an end, Odysseus rose and moved among the suitors, extending his hand to beg for alms. But this was no ordinary act of supplication. He wished to test them, to see who among them had a kind heart and who was truly cruel. Some, stirred by a flicker of pity, tossed him scraps of food, while others merely looked at him with curiosity, questioning who he was and where he had come from. Melanthius, with a sneer, dismissed the matter, saying that the swineherd had brought the man into the house, though he knew little of his origins. Antinous, hearing this, muttered in disdain, questioning why Eumaeus had brought yet another beggar into the city. He complained that they already had too many useless mouths feasting on Odysseus's wealth in his absence, and there was no need for another. Eumaeus, undeterred by Antinous's cruelty, responded firmly. He reminded the suitor that he had always treated Odysseus's servants harshly, particularly him. Yet, despite the insults, he remained steadfast, caring little for Antinous' opinions as long as Penelope and Telemachus still ruled the household. Telemachus interrupted Eumaeus, telling him to drop the matter regarding Antinous. He chided Antinous for his greed, noting that neither he nor his mother begrudged helping the poor. Enraged, Antinous called Telemachus insolent and grabbed a footstool to throw at Odysseus. When Odysseus approached to beg, telling a tale of hardship, Antinous remained cruel. Odysseus remarked on the mismatch between Antinous' appearance and his heart. Antinous hurled the footstool, striking Odysseus' shoulder. Odysseus stood firm, shook his head silently, and returned to his place by the door. While Telemachus suppressed his anger, Penelope, hearing everything from her balcony, sent for the beggar, wishing to offer him clothes and hear his news. Odysseus declined, preferring to wait until nightfall when he could speak with her privately about her husband's return. He remained by the doorstep as the oblivious suitors continued their revelry, awaiting his chance to see his wife. Yet another encounter lay ahead. Chapter 10. Odysseus among the Suitors. A beggar named Iris entered the hall, his tall but gaunt frame betraying the fact that he was well fed. A favorite among the suitors, he had long been useful to them in various ways. However, his usual place was now occupied, and when he saw the old man sitting there, anger and disdain flashed across his face. Confident in his size and the support of the suitors, he confronted Odysseus with arrogance, demanding that he leave immediately or face the consequences. Odysseus met his glare with a dark, steady gaze, questioning what harm he had done to deserve such hostility. He had taken nothing from Iris, nor did he begrudge him his share. There was space enough for both of them, and there was no need to speak of fighting, but if it came to that, even in his old age, he might still strike a blow that would rid himself of the nuisance for a long time. Iris, enraged, scoffed at the words, dismissing them as the feeble threats of a washed-up old man. He boasted that he could break Odysseus's jaw with ease and urged him to prepare himself so that all might witness how he would deal with him. Until that moment, the suitors had paid little attention to the quarrel, but at Iris's outburst, Antinous suddenly took an interest. Amused, he called out to the others, laughing at the spectacle unfolding before them. The idea of a fight between the two beggars delighted the suitors, who quickly sprang up, forming a circle around them. Antinous, seeing an opportunity for sport, declared that the winner would receive a fine piece of roasted tripe and, from that day forward, would have exclusive rights to beg in the hall, ensuring no other beggar would share in their feasts. The suitors cheered in agreement, eager to see the contest unfold. Slowly, Odysseus rose, feigning stiffness in his joints. He lamented that it was unfair for an old man, weakened by years of hardship, to be forced into a fight with someone younger and stronger. Yet hunger left him no choice but to try his luck. Before engaging, he insisted that the suitors swear no one would interfere or lend Iris any aid in the fight. The suitors swore the oath. Then Odysseus tucked up his rags, revealing his broad shoulders, muscular arms, and strong legs. The suitors were astonished. Iris, now terrified, regretted his rash challenge. He hesitated, but the servants grabbed him and pushed him forward. Trembling, he tried to resist, but Antinous forced him to stand and the fight began. Odysseus considered whether to break the wretch's skull with a single punch or to strike him with a milder blow so as not to arouse suspicion among the suitors. He wisely chose the latter. Iris swung first and struck Odysseus on the shoulder, but in an instant, Odysseus delivered a powerful uppercut to his jaw, causing blood to gush from his mouth. With a shriek, Iris collapsed, clutching his face and kicking his feet in pain. The suitors roared with laughter. Odysseus dragged the defeated man out into the courtyard by his heels and left him lying in a corner. Then he put on his old rags, picked up his wallet, and returned to his place by the door. The suitors, still laughing, came over to shake hands with him. Antinous placed the roasted tripe on his wallet, while Amphinomus gave him bread and wine, drinking to his health and wishing him better days ahead. Before this scene had unfolded, Athene had inspired Penelope with the idea of appearing before the suitors. The goddess wanted her to use clever words to curb their reckless feasting and plundering. More importantly, she wished to give the disguised Odysseus the joy of seeing his wife in all her majesty, radiating purity, innocence, and unwavering faithfulness. With divine beauty bestowed upon her by Athene, Penelope descended from her chamber, dressed in a graceful robe, her face veiled, and accompanied by 2 servant women. As she entered the hall, all eyes turned to her in admiration. Each suitor longed for her to choose him as her husband. Eurymachus said,
"By all the gods, noble Penelope, if all the sons of Greece could see thee, thy palace would be even more crowded with suitors than it is now. Thou art far superior to all other women in beauty and nobility of soul."
Penelope replied,
"Alas, Eurymachus, the gods took away my beauty when my dear husband sailed to fight against Troy. If only he were restored to me, I would live a glorious life. But now, I grieve in sorrow, anxiety, and solitude. When he held my hand for the last time, he said, 'Dear wife, I am leaving for a long war in a distant land. Only the gods know if I shall return. Take care of our home and property, respect my father and mother, and raise our son carefully. When he reaches manhood, if I have not returned, give him his place in the house and wed another.' Alas, I never believed that day would come, but fate has decreed otherwise. And now my unwanted marriage draws near. But what kind of courtship is this? It is customary for suitors to bring their own cattle and fatted calves for the feast, invite the bride's family, and present her with rich gifts. Who has ever heard of men squandering the wealth of the woman they are courting?"
The suitors felt ashamed and promised to bring Penelope fine gifts the next day. As night fell, the maids arrived to light the lamps. In those times, this meant burning shavings in a brazier placed on high pedestals and adding more shavings when the flames died down. Watching them, Odysseus told them to go instead to the queen's chambers, turn the spindle, comb the wool, and keep her company, assuring them that he would tend to the torches himself. The maids only laughed at him, but when he threatened to report them to Telemachus, they quickly ran away, leaving him alone. He carefully tended the lights while observing everything the suitors did and said. Although he had gained some favor after his fight with Iris, the suitors could not resist mocking him. Eurymachus, laughing, pointed out to the others how the beggar's bald head shone, joking that such a glow could only belong to the gods. Encouraged by the laughter of those around him, he continued his insults.
"Hey, old man, if you weren't so lazy and didn't spend all your time wandering around, I could offer you a job. What do you say? Want to be my servant? You could plow fields, plant trees, and collect leaves for bedding. I'd pay you fairly and give you proper clothes and shoes. But I'm sure you'd rather just sit around doing nothing and get free food."
Listen, Eurymachus, if we worked together in the fields, plowing or cutting grass, you'd see who's really better at the job. And if we went to war and I had proper weapons and armor, you'd see me fighting bravely at the front. Just because you're the strongest among these weak men, you think you're powerful. But let me tell you something. If Odysseus ever comes back, you'll run away so fast you won't even fit through these doors.
Enraged by the beggar's boldness, Eurymachus shouted that he would teach him a lesson for daring to defy him. Grabbing a footstool, he hurled it at Odysseus, but Odysseus swiftly ducked, throwing himself at Amphinomus's feet, and the stool flew over him, striking a servant's arm. The impact knocked the wine jar from the servant's hands, sending him tumbling backward. The suitors grew angry and rushed forward, threatening the stranger, but Telemachus quickly stood up and commanded them to be silent, declaring that enough had been done for the night and it was time to leave the palace and rest. The suitors, shocked at Telemachus's boldness, hesitated, for he was usually mild in manner. Frustrated, they bit their lips, but Amphinomus, gentler than the others, calmed them and urged them to go. Before departing, they made their final sacrifice to the gods and then left for their homes. Odysseus remained behind, and as soon as the suitors had left, he signaled to Telemachus to help him carry all the weapons to the upper rooms. As they climbed the stairs with the swords and shields, the dark passageway suddenly filled with a mysterious light. When all the weapons had been stored away, the father told his son to go to bed while he returned to the hall to wait for Penelope. She entered from her chamber as radiant as the goddess Aphrodite. Her maids placed a seat for her by the hearth and tended the fire. When the flames rose and the old beggar was still sitting there, some of them scolded him, and one even threatened to drive him away with a burning stick. But the queen rebuked the maid sharply. Then she ordered a seat to be placed for the guest opposite her own by the fire, and began to question him. Odysseus did not want to deceive his dear wife, but she was determined to learn his name and origin, so he had no choice but to weave the same story he had told the swineherd. He said he had seen Odysseus 20 years earlier in Crete, when the hero had stopped there with Idomeneus on his way to Troy. At this, the cunning Penelope decided to test his honesty.
Honored guest, if thou hast hosted my husband in thy father's house, tell me what he wore and who accompanied him.
I remember perfectly. He wore a magnificent cloak of dark, shaggy wool, fastened across the chest with a golden clasp. The clasp was finely crafted, showing a young roebuck seized by a dog. The design was so lifelike that the dog seemed rigid, and the struggling buck appeared to kick with its feet as if trying to escape. Under the purple cloak, he wore a fine tunic of bright white wool. He was a noble figure, and the women admired him. As for his attendants, I cannot recall them all, but I remember the herald because he was humpbacked. I believe they called him Eurybates. Odysseus loved him above all the others for his loyalty.
You're right. He cared for him deeply. And you're telling the truth about everything. I made those clothes with my own hands and put that clasp on them myself. My husband looked so handsome wearing them. But now I miss him terribly. I've spent so many days crying and waiting for him to return. And these suitors make my life so difficult. You can't imagine how much I suffer every day.
Odysseus, though overwhelmed with emotion, remained in control. He urged her to weep no more, assuring her that her suffering would soon end. Swearing by Zeus and the sacred hearth, he vowed that Odysseus would return and all would unfold just as he had foretold. Penelope, moved by his words, called for her maidens, instructing them to prepare a bed and covers for their guest so that he might rest in comfort. She declared that the next morning they would bathe and anoint him so that he could take his place worthily among the men and dine at Telemachus's side. She warned that any servant who dared insult or mock him would face severe consequences. Odysseus, ever cautious, declined the offer of fine bedding, saying he had not been accustomed to such luxury since leaving Crete. He preferred to remain by the fire and insisted that none of the young maids touch him. However, if among her household there was an old, faithful woman who had suffered as much as he had, he would allow her to wash his feet. Penelope, understanding his request, called upon Euryclea, the devoted nurse who had once cared for Odysseus from childhood. She asked her to perform the long-neglected task, reminding her that if fate had been kinder, she might have been washing the feet of her dear master instead. Euryclea, overcome with emotion, wept as she prepared to serve the guest. She declared that the gods could bear witness to her love for her noble master, whom she had cherished like a son. Now, she would care for the stranger as her mistress commanded, though she confessed that from the moment she had first laid eyes on him, she had been struck by how much he resembled Odysseus in both voice and figure. Odysseus, ever cunning, replied that many who had known them both had remarked on the same likeness, and that men often jested by calling him Odysseus. The old woman brought a tub of warm water. Meanwhile, the beggar turned his back to the fire, suddenly realizing that he was at risk of being discovered. Since his youth, he had carried a deep scar above his right knee, a mark from a furious boar that had wounded him during a hunt. Euryclea knew this scar well, so he positioned himself in the shadows to keep it hidden. But despite his efforts, the moment her hand touched the scar, she recognized it instantly. In her joyful surprise, she dropped his leg, knocking over the tub of water. Fortunately, Penelope had stepped out for a moment and did not hear the old woman's cry of joy. Odysseus reacted swiftly, springing up and covering her mouth with his hand. In a hushed but urgent tone, he warned her not to betray him, reminding her that her silence was essential for his safety. If anyone in the palace learned that Odysseus had returned, all his plans would be at risk. Euryclea, regaining her composure, looked at him with solemn devotion. She assured him that her heart was true and faithful, and she would not utter a word to anyone. Just then, Penelope returned and sat down across from the beggar once more.
I can't seem to find any peace. Every night, I have dreams about my husband coming home. When Telemachus was young, I stayed here to take care of our home. But now that he's grown up, I worry he's upset with me because I haven't chosen a new husband and left. He's watching our wealth being wasted away, and there's nothing I can do about it. My parents keep telling me I should remarry. Let me tell you about a strange dream I had last night. I have 20 geese in the courtyard that I love taking care of. In my dream, a huge eagle came down from the mountains and killed all my geese, then flew away. I started crying, and while my servants were trying to comfort me, the eagle came back. It landed on the roof and spoke like a human, saying, "Don't worry, daughter of Icarius. This dream will come true. The geese represent your suitors, and I am your husband, coming back to get revenge on them and protect you." The dream scared me so much that I woke up. When I looked out the window, I saw my geese peacefully eating their food, just like always.
The beggar reassured Penelope that the meaning of her dream was unmistakable. Her suitors would meet their sudden downfall.
Dear stranger, dreams aren't always true. Tomorrow is an important day. I've finally set up a contest. Whoever wins must marry me. I'll have them bring out Odysseus's old bow, and the suitors will try to string it. Whoever can do it will win, and I'll have to leave my husband's beautiful home with them.
The stranger nodded in approval, though inwardly he rejoiced at the opportunity this would give him to defeat the suitors. The noble Penelope then ascended to her chamber, while Odysseus remained by the fireside in the hall. Chapter 11. The Night Before Justice. Odysseus turned restlessly on his couch when suddenly his divine friend Athene appeared beside him and gently asked,
"Why are you so worried? Don't you trust me? I am the goddess who has kept you safe through all your dangers. Even if 50 groups of suitors tried to fight you, you would defeat them all. Now sleep and have faith in my protection."
Odysseus slept soundly, but before dawn, he was awakened by the heart-wrenching cries of Penelope. She called out his name repeatedly, her voice filled with sorrow. A vivid dream had shaken her. She had seen Odysseus lying beside her in full armor. Now her peace was gone, and she wept bitterly, longing for the husband she had lost. Hearing her sorrow, Odysseus's heart ached. Rising from his bed, he looked out into the dark night, where the stars still shone brightly. He lifted his hands in prayer, pleading for a sign from Jupiter to reassure him that the gods had not abandoned him. Almost immediately, a deep roll of thunder echoed from the eastern sky, even though the heavens remained clear. At the same moment, a servant grinding grain murmured to herself, unaware that her words reached Odysseus's ears. She spoke to Jupiter, marveling at the sudden thunder on a cloudless night, and wished that it might be a sign. She prayed that her suffering might end, that the suitors who feasted while she toiled might perish, and that this would be their final night of indulgence. Hearing her words, Odysseus felt his resolve strengthen. He paced the great hall, deep in thought, eagerly awaiting the morning. When dawn arrived, the household stirred with activity. Telemachus left for the market, and Euryclea gathered the maids to assign their tasks, reminding them that the suitors would arrive early to celebrate the feast of the new moon. Eumaeus appeared soon after, driving 3 fat pigs for the feast. He went straight to the beggar from Crete, and Odysseus greeted him with a warm handshake, asking if his standing with the household had improved. Eumaeus could only wish for divine justice, cursing the suitors for their daily misdeeds. As they spoke, Melanthius, the goatherd, passed by and could not resist mocking and threatening the stranger. But moments later, Philoetius, the master herdsman, arrived. Like Eumaeus, he despised the suitors, but had remained in Odysseus's household out of loyalty and fear that the herds would fall into unworthy hands. Catching sight of the beggar in the courtyard, he turned to Eumaeus and, with quiet curiosity, asked about the stranger. Though bowed by hardship, he noted, the man carried himself like a king. Meanwhile, the suitors had gathered in the market, plotting once more against Telemachus. His boldness had become more threatening to them each day. Amphinomus tried to dissuade them, and for the moment, they agreed to let him live. Soon, the noisy crowd stormed into the palace. In the hall, they set aside their mantles and prepared their feast, offering up fat goats, young lambs, fatted boars, and cattle. Others mixed the wine. While they were eating, Telemachus set a table near the door for the old man and gave him food and drink. But as the feast continued, the suitors could not restrain their arrogance. A young man, the son of a wealthy noble from Som, Ctesippus, addressed the group.
Listen, noble suitors. The stranger at the door has had his share of the feast, but I shall now offer him a special gift. He may give it to the maid who washes his feet, or any of the servants. Behold this splendid bull's hoof. May it bring him fortune.
He flung it swiftly at Odysseus's head, but Odysseus dodged it skillfully. The suitors roared with laughter, and Odysseus, though seething with rage, laughed along with them. But Telemachus leaped to his feet, his anger flaring like a fire.
You're lucky you missed, Ctesippus. If you had hit our guest, I would have killed you with my spear. Instead of planning your wedding, your father would be planning your funeral. Listen, all of you, don't push me any further. It's bad enough that you feast on my cattle, and I know you want me dead. Well, if that's what you want, then go ahead and kill me. I'd rather die than watch you treat guests in my house so cruelly. You haven't even spared my mother's servants from your awful behavior.
A heavy silence fell over the room. Then Agelaus spoke.
Friends, you're right not to argue, because Telemachus makes some fair points. But listen, young prince, you're grown up now and can run your household. Talk to your mother and convince her to choose one of us as her husband. Your father isn't coming back. We all know that. Once your mother marries and leaves, you can enjoy your wealth in peace, and we'll leave you alone.
By Jupiter, I do not stand in my mother's way. She may choose whomever she wishes, but I shall never force her to leave this house with a command from my lips.
Athene struck the suitors with madness. They laughed uncontrollably, their faces twisted in wild amusement, while Odysseus, Telemachus, and the servants watched in horror. But Theoclymenus, the seer from Pylos, suddenly declared in a prophetic trance,
Something terrible is happening to you all. I can see it clearly. Your faces look strange and sick. Your eyes are foggy. You have bruises on your heads, and you're crying without knowing why. And now I see something worse. There's blood everywhere. It's running down the walls and covering the floor. The courtyard is filling with ghosts rushing toward death. The sunlight has disappeared and everything has turned dark.
The suitors only laughed louder, their foolish blindness growing worse. The midday meal was eaten in wild disorder, and not one of them realized what fate awaited them that evening. That afternoon, noble Penelope remembered her plan to challenge the suitors with a test of skill. She climbed to the chamber where the treasures of her dear husband were kept. There, hanging on the wall, was his favorite bow, made of strong, pliant horn. It was dusty and neglected, untouched for 20 years. Tears fell from Penelope's eyes as she took it down and brushed away the dust. She sat down, placed it across her knees, and sobbed aloud. When she had finished crying, she left the chamber, carrying the bow, while her maidens followed with the heavy quiver full of arrows. Wrapped modestly in her long veil, she entered the grand hall of columns. Beside her stood an attendant maiden. She spoke to the suitors.
Come, brave suitors who gather in my house daily, to feast and drink, claiming to woo me. Hear me now, and listen to the challenge that will decide my fate. Here is the bow and arrows of my dear husband, Odysseus. Here also are the rings. Whoever can most easily string this bow and shoot an arrow through the 12 rings, I shall follow as my husband. My dear son shall not lose his inheritance because of me.
She handed the weapon to Eumaeus, who carried it into the hall. As the loyal swineherd held his master's bow, he was overcome with emotion, tears filling his eyes as he kissed the weapon. Philoetius, the faithful herdsman, shared in his grief, unable to contain his sorrow for the master they both longed to see again. Their display of devotion, however, was met with scorn. Antinous sneered at them, dismissing their emotions with a cold command to bring the bow forward without delay. The suitors gathered in the hall as Telemachus moved with practiced precision, arranging the axes in a perfect line so that each formed a ring. He then stepped to the threshold, lifted the bow in his hands, and studied it thoughtfully. The challenge intrigued him, and he could not resist the temptation to test his own strength. Confidently, he declared his intent to try. With effort, he attempted to bend the bow, but it would not yield. Undeterred, he rested for a moment before making another attempt, yet still he could not string it. On his third try, he was on the verge of success when a subtle glance from Odysseus stopped him. Understanding the unspoken command, Telemachus feigned disappointment, leaned the bow against the wall, and stepped aside. Admitting that he was either too weak or too young, he invited the suitors to take their turn, urging them to bring the contest to its conclusion. Laodes stepped forward first, gripping the bow with determination, but his strength failed him. One by one the suitors followed, each attempting to bend the bow, yet not a single one succeeded. Frustration grew among them as they tried everything to make the task easier, rubbing the horn with fat, warming it by the fire, yet the bow remained unyielding. Meanwhile, Eumaeus and Philoetius slipped outside together, and Odysseus quickly followed. Pulling them aside, he lowered his voice and asked if they remained loyal. He reminded them of their devotion to their master and pressed them to reveal whether they would stand by him if he were to return and challenge the suitors. Philoetius, his voice filled with longing, declared that if the gods granted him this wish, he would fight with all his strength. Eumaeus, just as devoted, echoed the sentiment, wishing with all his heart that it might come true. With quiet authority, Odysseus revealed the truth. There was no need to wish any longer. Their master had returned, and he needed them now. To prove his identity, he pulled aside his cloak and showed them the scar on his leg, the mark left by the wild boar from his youth. They recognized the mark and, overcome with emotion, fell upon his neck, kissing his face and shoulders. But Odysseus quickly commanded them to restrain themselves lest they be discovered.
Now listen to my plan. This must be done now or never. The gods are with me, and you, my faithful friends, shall be as brothers to Telemachus when all is finished. I will reward you with wealth and land. But you must do as I say. When we return, I will ask for the bow, and the suitors will object. Eumaeus, do not hesitate. Bring it to me. Then go immediately to the old nurse and tell her to lock all the women in their quarters. Philoetius, hurry to the main gates of the palace and lock them, securing the bars so that none of the suitors can escape. I will enter first. Follow me, one at a time and quietly.
When Odysseus re-entered the hall and took his place by the door, the bow had just reached Eurymachus. Seated by the hearth, he worked to soften the stiff wood, rubbing it with grease and warming it by the fire. With growing frustration, he attempted to string it again and again, but after 10 failed tries, he finally set it down, his face clouded with embarrassment. Antinous, unwilling to test his own strength and eager to maintain his pride, dismissed the challenge for the moment. He suggested they wait until the next day, arguing that today was a feast day and not suited for such strenuous tasks. Instead, he proposed making a sacrifice to Apollo before trying again, confident that divine favor would aid their efforts. For now, he insisted, they should fill their cups, drink generously, and enjoy the feast. The suitors agreed, and the servants did as they were told. As drinking resumed, Odysseus stood up and spoke.
Listen to me, noble suitors of the honored princess, and especially to you, Antinous and Eurymachus. I have a request to make, though it is only in jest. Since you refuse to string the bow on this feast day, let me try and see if I still have any strength left from my youth, or if age and hardship have taken it from me.
As he expected, murmurs spread through the crowd, and Antinous spoke for them all.
Pitiful stranger, have you lost your senses? Has the wine made you foolish? Be careful, or you will be put on a ship and sent to King Echetus, the scourge of strangers. There, you would not escape with your nose and ears intact. You had better stay quiet, take what you are given, and leave such things to younger men.
Penelope had remained in the hall with her attendants, waiting for the contest's outcome. Now she spoke.
Antinous, I think you are not being fair. Why should we forbid a guest from trying? Do you fear that if he strings the bow, I will marry him? Do not trouble yourself over such a thing. That is impossible.
Eurymachus answered,
O noble queen, that is not what concerns us. We fear the judgment of others. If a mere wandering beggar succeeds where we have all failed, it would be an eternal disgrace for us.
Then Telemachus stood up and spoke.
Mother, you're right, but I have the strongest claim to this bow in our house. I can give it to anyone I want, and no one should try to stop me. Please go back to your room now and focus on your own work and the servants. This contest with the bow is for men to handle, and since I'm in charge of this house, it's especially my responsibility.
Amazed by her son's words, Penelope withdrew to her chamber, her mind turning over everything he had said. As she lay down, grief for her dear husband overwhelmed her, and she wept quietly until Pallas Athene, with a gentle touch, lulled her into sleep. Meanwhile, in the great hall, the swineherd, keeping watch for Odysseus's signal, boldly stepped forward and handed him the bow. The suitors sprang to their feet, their hands twitching as if ready to strike, but Telemachus silenced them with a commanding voice, asserting his authority as master of the house. His words rang through the hall, and though a burst of mocking laughter followed, their anger quickly faded. The swineherd slipped away unnoticed to carry out Odysseus's instructions. At the same time, Philoetius stepped outside, closed and barred the palace doors, then returned just as silently, taking his place beside the swineherd, ready for what was to come. Now, every gaze in the hall was fixed on the beggar as he turned the bow over in his hands, inspecting it with great care. He examined the wood for any signs of wear or damage, running his fingers along its smooth surface as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. Some of the younger suitors leaned toward each other, whispering with amused contempt. They scoffed at the sight, speculating that perhaps the old fool had owned a similar bow once or fancied himself skilled enough to craft one. They smirked at his apparent fascination, failing to see the storm that was about to break upon them. Odysseus then moved his table aside, lifted the great bow, and, as effortlessly as a minstrel plucking the strings of a harp, he pulled the taut cord. The bow sang with a sound as pure as the song of a swallow. At that moment, a mighty thunderclap echoed through the palace. The suitors trembled, but the king rejoiced at the sign from the gods. He placed an arrow on the string, and without rising or even pausing to take aim, he released it. The arrow shot cleanly through the 12 rings without missing a single one. The suitors sat in stunned silence. Then Odysseus turned to his son and said,
"You see, Telemachus, your guest has not brought you disgrace. My strength remains. But now I believe it is time for supper. Let us enjoy our meal and amuse ourselves with song and music."
As he spoke, he gave Telemachus a secret signal. The young man understood immediately. He stepped outside, then quickly returned armed, and took his place beside his father, gripping his sword and shield, his face dark with anticipation. Chapter 12. The Return of the King. Odysseus sprang to his feet, his movements swift and deliberate. Tightening his ragged garments, he cast the remaining arrows to the ground before him and leaped to the doorway, gripping the bow firmly in his hands. His voice rang through the hall as he declared his next shot, calling upon Apollo to grant him favor. Without hesitation, he released the deadly arrow, and it flew with unerring precision, striking Antinous in the neck just as he lifted a golden cup to his lips. The impact sent blood gushing from his mouth, and he crumpled to the ground in violent convulsions, overturning the table in his fall. The rich feast of food and wine spilled across the floor, staining the once grand hall with the marks of sudden death. For a moment, stunned silence filled the room. Then, pandemonium erupted. The suitors leaped from their seats, their faces contorted with shock and fury as they frantically searched for weapons. Their voices clashed in an uproar of disbelief and rage, cursing the madman who had dared to strike down one of their own. They cried out threats of vengeance, promising that the vultures would soon feast on his flesh. But even in their panic, they failed to grasp the full weight of the disaster that had begun to unfold. They thought the hero had struck Antinous by accident, but Odysseus quickly made them see the truth.
"You dogs, you thought I would never return. So you devoured my wealth, mistreated my servants, and insulted my wife for years with shameless arrogance. You feared neither the wrath of the gods nor the judgment of men. But now your day of reckoning has come."
Terror seized the suitors. Before they could react, Odysseus raised the bow again and shot Eurymachus in the chest just as he reached for his sword. The arrow struck deep, and he crumpled to the ground. Telemachus, armed with a spear, stood beside his father, ready to protect him. Meanwhile, Odysseus loosed arrow after arrow into the crowd, cutting down one suitor after another. Telemachus quickly ran to fetch helmets, shields, and spears for the two loyal herdsmen, Eumaeus and Philoetius. The three of them armed themselves at once. However, the treacherous goat herd Melanthius, thinking quickly, managed to slip away unnoticed through a side door. He ran to the upper chamber where Telemachus had stored the extra weapons and brought some down for the suitors. Suddenly, Odysseus realized that many of the suitors in the front row were now armed, and spears began to fly toward him. Odysseus turned to Telemachus in dismay, realizing that the suitors had somehow armed themselves. He suspected treachery, cursing the possibility that a servant or the wretched goatherd had smuggled weapons to them. Telemachus, stricken with guilt, admitted his mistake. In the chaos of battle, he must have left the armory door open, giving the cunning goatherd the opportunity to aid the enemy. Odysseus's sharp eyes caught sight of the traitor once more, slipping away to fetch more weapons. Without hesitation, he ordered Eumaeus and Philetius to seize him, bind him, and hang him up, while he and Telemachus held off the suitors. Sensing that Odysseus and his son were momentarily outnumbered, the suitors regained their courage, pressing forward with renewed confidence. The tide of battle threatened to shift against the rightful master of the house, until, in a sudden burst of divine power, Athene appeared. Taking the form of Mentor, she stood armed from head to foot, and with a mighty blow of her shield, she drove back the nearest attackers. A wave of fear swept through the suitors, but their desperation turned to anger. They shouted threats at her, warning that if she dared to fight against them, she would share Odysseus's fate. Some urged her to flee while she still had the chance, believing that the old man she appeared to be could not stand against them, but they did not yet understand the force that had entered the battle. These words angered Athene, and she strengthened Odysseus with a burst of divine power. He could feel her presence and fought with renewed fury. The two herdsmen returned with fresh weapons, and the battle raged on. Seeing that the outcome was now certain, Athene left the final task to the brave warriors. At last, most of the suitors lay dead. Some had already breathed their last, while others writhed in agony on the spears that had pierced them, their blood pooling across the floor. The scene was horrific. Only a few remained alive. As Odysseus and his allies prepared to strike them down, one man suddenly leaped from behind a column and threw himself at Odysseus's knees. It was Liodes, the suitor's priest.
"Spare me. I had no part in the crimes of these men. I was only their priest, performing the sacred rituals when they sacrificed your cattle."
If you were their priest, then you must have often prayed for misfortune to befall me. No doubt you prophesied my ruin and asked the gods to destroy me. For that, you will meet the fate you deserve.
With those words, he raised his sword, and with a single stroke, severed the priest's head. It tumbled to the floor, rolling through the blood-soaked dust. Odysseus moved through the hall, searching every possible hiding place, but no one remained alive. The battle was over. As he surveyed the scene, he felt both astonishment and horror at the destruction he had wrought. The once grand hall, filled with laughter and feasting, was now strewn with lifeless bodies, the suitors lying in heaps where they had fallen. At last he let his sword fall from his grasp and removed the heavy bronze helmet from his sweat-drenched forehead. The weight of the battle lifted from his shoulders, but his mind remained sharp. There was still much to be done. Turning to Telemachus, he ordered him to go quickly and summon their old nurse, Eurycleia. There were questions that needed answering, and he trusted her above all others in the household. Telemachus brought the old woman, and as soon as she entered, she lifted her hands in joy and began to celebrate. But Odysseus stopped her with a firm voice.
Silence, woman. In your heart you may rejoice that justice has been done and punishment has been served, but it is a sin to gloat over the dead. They have met their fate, but it is the gods who have carried out their will through me. Now tell me about the women of the household, those who remained loyal and those who have betrayed me.
I will gladly obey you. 50 women serve in the palace, but 12 of them have been unfaithful. They strayed from the path of virtue, disobeying both me and the noble Penelope. But let me go upstairs and wake the queen. She does not know you have returned, for a god has cast her into a deep sleep. How surprised she will be.
Odysseus stopped Eurycleia before she could wake Penelope, instructing her to first gather the 12 disloyal women and bring them before him. She hurried away to carry out his command. Once she had left, He turned to Telemachus and the two loyal herdsmen, giving them clear and unwavering orders.
When they arrive, they must first help us clean the hall. When the work is done, take them outside to the courtyard, drive them into the narrow passageway, and strike them down with your swords. Let their souls join the shadows of the suitors they have served.
Moments later, the 12 women entered, their faces pale with fear. The sight of the bloodied hall and the lifeless bodies strewn across the floor left them trembling. Their punishment awaited them, but first, Odysseus commanded them to remove the corpses and lay them in the gallery. There would be no more mercy. The women hesitated, but under the watchful eyes of the herdsmen, they began their grim task. Odysseus oversaw their work, ensuring everything was done properly. When all was set in order, Telemachus and the herdsmen led the women to their fate. Afterward, they sought out Melanthius and delivered a fitting punishment to the treacherous goatherd. The slaughter was complete. The herdsmen washed their hands and feet, then returned to the hall. There, Odysseus ordered Euryclea to light a fire, bring sulfur, and cleanse the palace with its purifying smoke to rid it of the curse of bloodshed. Then, the old servants came rushing to their master, weeping with joy. Overcome with emotion, they kissed him, and Odysseus, moved by their loyalty, pressed their hands warmly in greeting. At last, Odysseus allowed Euryclea to bring the long-awaited news to Penelope. Breathless and overwhelmed, the old nurse rushed into the queen's chamber where she lay in peaceful slumber. Shaking her gently, she called for her to wake, her voice trembling with urgency. Odysseus had returned. It was over. The suitors lay in heaps in the courtyard. Had she heard nothing? She must come quickly. Penelope stirred, stretching and rubbing her eyes, then sighed in weary disbelief. The nurse's excitement seemed nothing more than a cruel trick. How could she wake her with such a tale, playing on her deepest hopes? She had been sleeping so peacefully, and now she was being deceived. Only the old woman's age spared her from Penelope's anger. But Euryclea insisted, her voice steady with certainty. It was no jest. Odysseus had returned, and with Telemachus's help, he had slain every last suitor. The great vengeance had come while Penelope slept.
Ah, mother, do not rejoice too soon. You know how much I long for Odysseus. But I also know the ways of the gods. They often wander the earth, rewarding the good, surprising the wicked, and punishing long-standing evils. If the suitors have truly been slain, it must have been the work of a god, moved by my suffering. How could a mere man, even one stronger and braver than Odysseus, have accomplished such an impossible feat? I did admire the stranger's mind, but he did not remind me of Odysseus. No, that was not my vigorous, fearless husband. But I will go and see for myself. I will look upon the aftermath and speak with my son. If this stranger is truly my husband, I will know him by secret signs. But if he is a god, as I suspect, we will make sacrifices to honor him and offer him our worship.
They descended into the hall, where they found Odysseus sitting by the fire, leaning against a pillar. He did not look up but waited for his wife to speak. She sat across from him in silence for a long time. Sometimes, when she gazed at him intently, she thought it might be him. But then, when her eyes fell upon his ragged clothes, she could not believe it. Telemachus, overcome with emotion, turned to his mother in disbelief. Could she not recognize her own husband? Was her heart truly so unmoved? But Penelope, still frozen in astonishment, gently refuted his words. He was wrong to accuse her of indifference. She was speechless, unable to comprehend such a miracle. She dared not address the man before her or even meet his gaze. If he truly was Odysseus, they would soon recognize each other, for there were secret signs between them that no one else could know. Odysseus, watching her closely, smiled with understanding. He reassured her that she had every right to hesitate, for he stood before her in rags, unrecognizable after so many years. He did not blame her caution, but there was no time to dwell on this reunion just yet. A greater concern loomed over them. The suitors lay dead, and their families would soon demand retribution. They had not slain a single man but over 100. How would they protect themselves against the inevitable outrage of the townspeople? Telemachus, humbled by the weight of his father's words, deferred to him without hesitation. No mortal was as wise as Odysseus. Whatever he decided, they would follow. They would stand beside him and assist in any way they could.
Then I will tell you what seems wise to me. First, each of us must go to the bath and dress in our finest clothes. The women must also put on their holiday garments, as is fitting for the day their master has returned. The minstrel must play his harp so that anyone passing by will think Penelope is celebrating her wedding day. Then, in the early morning, we will leave the house and flee to Laertes' estate, where the gods will guide us further.
The household immediately followed his instructions, and soon the hall, which had echoed with the deadly blows of Odysseus's spear just an hour earlier and had looked like a battlefield, was now filled with joyful music and song. Meanwhile, Odysseus also went to cleanse himself and rid himself of his rags. The old housekeeper led him to a warm bath and afterward anointed his head with precious oil. Then, as he stepped out, the goddess Athene suddenly restored his beauty. He appeared taller and stronger, the bald patches on his head vanished, and his hair once again shone in thick, brown waves. His cheeks glowed with fresh color, and the dullness disappeared from his eyes, which now burned with life. Blinded by the miraculous transformation, the housekeeper handed him a fine tunic and cloak. Clothed as a king and hero, the victorious Odysseus re-entered the hall. A hushed silence fell over the room as everyone gazed at him in awe. Penelope sprang up, overcome with joy. He stood before her just as she remembered him, unchanged from the day he had left her so many years ago. Yet doubt clouded her happiness. Could it truly be him? Was this a cruel illusion sent by the gods? Uncertainty gripped her, and she sank back into her chair, unsure whether to believe her own eyes. Odysseus stepped forward, his arms outstretched, eager to embrace her. Would she not accept him again as her husband? Had he longed for her all these years only to find her heart closed to him? But when she hesitated, he turned away in sorrow, calling upon Eurynome to prepare his bed so that he might retire in grief. Penelope, watching him closely, gave her own instructions. The bed should be set outside their chamber, wherever he wished, made ready with soft covers and fine linens. This was her final test, the proof she needed. Only the true Odysseus would know the secret of their marriage bed. At her words, Odysseus froze. If the bed could be moved, then their chamber had been destroyed. He had built it himself, carving the frame from the trunk of the great olive tree that stood in the courtyard. It was rooted in the earth, immovable unless the tree itself had been cut down.
If the bed can be carried out, then someone has destroyed our sleeping chamber. I built it so firmly into the trunk of the olive tree.
Odysseus, my dear Odysseus, now I know it is truly you, for no one in this house knows that secret except you and me. Welcome, my beloved husband, for whom I have wept through endless sleepless nights, praying to the gods for your safe return. Welcome, welcome. But do not be angry that I did not recognize you at once, or trust the first claim, like a foolish young girl. There are so many deceitful men. Oh, if only you knew the battle in my heart, while I was burning to embrace you. My coldness was never real. It was only caused by the immense pain of my love.
Their tears flowed together, and Penelope rested against the chest of her long-lost husband, overcome with happiness. She could not find words to express her feelings, only deep sighs of relief and love. Midnight had long passed when Eurynome brought a torch to guide them to their rest. Chapter 13. The Final Reckoning of Odysseus. Before dawn, after only a few hours of sleep, Odysseus rose and awakened his wife, Telemachus, and the herdsmen.
Come quickly, my friends. We must reach my father's plantation before daylight. Soon the news of the suitors' deaths will spread across the island, and the princes whose sons have not returned home will come looking for them. If they unite and lead their people against us, we will not be able to withstand them. That is why we will hide in Laertes' distant garden in the countryside. Some god will then guide us on what to do next. But you, Penelope, must stay here until I call for you. Go up to the upper chambers with your maidens, and remain there quietly. Their revenge will not reach you.
As soon as Odysseus finished speaking, the men gathered their weapons and set out. With the first light of dawn, they reached the enclosed land surrounding old Laertes' country estate. His house stood at the front, surrounded by farm buildings, while the workers were already busy in the fields. Laertes, however, was in the orchard, tending to the trees he cherished, as he did each day. Telemachus informed the servants that a stranger had arrived who wished to speak with the old king. Meanwhile, Odysseus turned to his son and the two herdsmen, lowering his voice so only they could hear. He instructed them to remain there and prepare a fattened pig for a sacrifice. He would go alone to his father, hoping to test whether Laertes would recognize him after all these years. Once he had spoken with him, he would bring him back so they could share a meal together. Odysseus found his father digging around a pear tree in the well-kept orchard. He was so focused on his work that he did not notice the newcomer. Odysseus's heart tightened at the sight of him. Laertes wore a dirty, coarse tunic, patched and mended many times. He had wrapped pieces of oxhide around his hands and ankles to protect them from thorns, and he wore a goatskin cap to shield his bald head from the cold morning air. Finally, he straightened up from his work and saw the well-dressed stranger standing before him.
Greetings, old man. You take such good care of your garden. Your trees and vines are thriving, yet you yourself seem neglected. What kind of miserly master lets you go about dressed in rags like a beggar? Tell me, where am I? I wish to ask for directions to the palace of Odysseus. I want to see that brave hero. He was my guest during his travels, and since my journey passed through Ithaca, I have stopped here to visit my dear friend.
I'm sorry, stranger, but you're too late. We don't know what happened to Odysseus. He might have drowned at sea, or his bones might be lying on some faraway beach. It's been 10 years since the war in Troy ended, and we've been waiting for him every single day. I miss him the most because I'm his father, Laertes. His mother already died from sadness, but I haven't been granted that escape from my pain.
Odysseus, filled with compassion, urged Laertes to weep no more, assuring him that the gods had joy in store for him and that he would see his son again while still alive. But Laertes, weary from years of longing, hesitated to believe such words. He pleaded for the truth, asking what the stranger knew of Odysseus, where he had seen him, and how long ago. Odysseus replied that it had been about 5 years since he last saw him, but questioned whether Laertes had not already heard the rumors spreading throughout the land. People were saying that Odysseus had returned only to find his home overrun by arrogant guests who had wasted his fortune and pursued his wife. Word had spread that, whether by strategy or force, he had destroyed them and reclaimed his place as master of his household. The old man, overwhelmed by the thought, lamented that if only such news were true. He desperately sought confirmation, wondering aloud if the stranger was a divine messenger bringing this hopeful tale. Odysseus, his voice trembling with emotion, struggled to hold back his tears. He asked Laertes if it was true that he had once gifted him the fig tree standing nearby when he was just a boy. Laertes affirmed it. Odysseus continued, reminding him of the beautiful row of pear trees, the long walks they had taken among the hedges, and how his father had taught him the names and uses of each plant. With each memory, Laertes' face changed, his breath catching in his throat. Then, overcome with recognition, Laertes cried out, demanding proof. His heart, torn between hope and disbelief, begged for a sign, something beyond words that could confirm the truth. Odysseus, his eyes shining with joy, lifted his tunic and revealed the scar on his leg, the wound from the boar's tusk on Mount Parnassus. He reminded his father how he had been sent there by his mother and father to collect the gifts promised by his grandfather, Autolycus. At last, there was no doubt left. The old king, seeing the mark with his own eyes, knew the truth. His son had returned. The old man's knees shook as he recognized the scar. Without hesitation, he embraced his beloved son, who covered his face with kisses. Then, Odysseus told him everything, his long journey, his hardships, and finally, the slaughter of the Suitors.
Now I see that the immortal gods still rule. At last justice has been served, but my son, how will you escape the vengeance that such a bloody deed will bring upon you?
Let that not trouble you. If the love of the people does not protect me, the spirit of Tiresias has promised me a place of refuge deep in the mainland, where a peaceful and happy old age awaits me. But now let us go down to the palace, where Telemachus and my faithful servants await us. You must clothe yourself as befits a king.
When all was ready, the joyful company sat down to eat together. Meanwhile, rumors of the terrible fate that had befallen the Suitors spread throughout the city. Their fathers and relatives hurried to the crowded marketplace, stirring up the people. The leader among them was Odysseus, the father of Antinous, who had hoped more than anyone that his son would win the hand of the beautiful Penelope and rule over all Ithaca. He swayed many with his passionate speech, but others hesitated, especially after hearing Medon and Halitherses. Medon urgently warned his fellow Ithacans that Odysseus had not achieved his victory without divine assistance. He had seen it with his own eyes, the goddess, disguised as Mentor, standing beside Odysseus and turning aside the spears. Even before she had revealed her power by shaking her shield, many had already fallen before him. He urged them not to oppose Odysseus, warning that to do so would be to fight against the will of the gods. Halitherses, the wise elder, added his voice to the plea, advising the men of Ithaca to lay down their arms and leave Odysseus be. He had only carried out the vengeance of the gods. Many among the crowd agreed and quietly returned to their homes, unwilling to challenge fate. However, the friends of the slain suitors and the loyal followers of Odysseus refused to listen. They armed themselves and marched toward Laertes' gardens, where Odysseus and his household stood ready for battle. Laertes, filled with pride and excitement, declared the day a glorious one, for he would have the honor of fighting alongside both his son and grandson. As he spoke, Pallas Athene, still disguised as Mentor, approached him and filled his heart with renewed courage. She urged him forward, calling upon him to open the battle by casting the first spear at the enemy. With a prayer to Jupiter, he hurled his spear. It struck true, piercing the bronze armor and sinking into Eupeithes' chest. At the same moment, a fiery thunderbolt from Jupiter crashed into the earth between the combatants. This terrifying omen, along with the death of their leader, filled the enemy with fear and confusion. Then the goddess stepped forward and declared,
"Men of Ithaca, hear me now and cease this futile bloodshed. Let your weapons fall silent, for this conflict brings nothing but sorrow to the immortal gods who watch from above." The paths of violence and vengeance lead only to more grief and destruction. Remember that you are all children of this sacred isle, neighbors, friends, and kinsmen. Return now to your peaceful homes and hearths, before more blood stains this hallowed ground.
No one dared defy her. Even the bravest warriors lowered their weapons, deciding never to fight against the man who had justice on his side. Over time, hatred faded, even among the fathers of the slain suitors. The wisdom, generosity, and kindness of Odysseus soon won over the people, and even his fiercest enemies became his allies. Odysseus did not forget the vow he had made in the land of the dead, to offer a young ox to the gods of the underworld and a black ram to the spirit of Tiresias when he returned home. The sacrificial animals were brought forth, and while the heralds prepared a feast for the people, Odysseus delivered the death stroke to the offerings. As the fat portions burned on the altar, he raised his hands and prayed solemnly.
Sacred gods of the underworld, here in my kingdom, I gratefully fulfill the vow I made in yours. I have overcome many trials and often barely escaped with my life, but I always trusted in a fortunate outcome. Now, merciful gods, I can look back on my past with gratitude. I will continue to offer these sacrifices, for one should honor the dead willingly and never fear the goddess of death and fate. But wherever destiny may lead me, grant that I may rule my people wisely and in peace, so that the name of the great Odysseus may live on for generations to come.